have the Zoom link up there? That's the Zoom picture on the screen.
Not sure what you mean.
Just when we see people talking, they can look up the screen and see it.
Oh yeah, yeah. If I stop sharing my screen, it'll start doing it.
Hey Scott, thanks for sending me those links.
Yeah, you're welcome. Do they make sense? They're not all unfortunately on the same page. Kind of have to jump between sections of code, but
No, that was helpful. Thank you.
Scott?
what's that, Rick?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're coming through on the podium kind of quietly.
Let me get up closer. Is that better?
No, because your microphone is muted and your voice is coming through on the podium microphone, which is 10 or 15 feet away.
Let me go up and see if I can move the podium mic down closer.
Okay.
Here.
Yeah.
Is that better?
It's about the same.
About the same? Okay. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So we got an echo.
So,
So-
Rick, I think the only way to reduce the echo is to mute the mic on the podium while your microphone is unmuted. Otherwise, you're going to have to mute your mic and unmute the podium.
Okay.
So, Marta, I think what you'll have to do is if anybody in the public wants to speak, then we will unmute the podium. But otherwise, we can just leave Rick's microphone unmuted. We just can't have both unmuted at the same time.
Okay. Do we have a quorum yet? Ron, Shanna, John.
That's all that I see as well.
One more here. We got Cortland on, that's good. Are you guys hearing an echo down here?
Very little. It's not annoying.
Okay.
Do you guys have the house speakers turned on, Rick?
I think we do.
Or the house microphone? If nobody shows up in person, we can just turn the house microphones off and you can just speak directly into the laptop.
Okay. Yeah, right now we don't have anyone in attendance, so we're good. Yeah, if you see another planning commissioner hop on, let me know. I'm looking too.
Okay.
Let me make a few phone calls.
Hey, Rick,
Yeah.
to open a public hearing, do I need to call a vote?
Yes. Yep, you'll need
Okay.
to, start, call a vote, and we'll have a seconded, call a vote, and then, then just make sure you close the public hearing at the end.
You have to close it 3 times or just once?
Well, once you open it, take the public comment. The public hearing, once you open the public hearing, take the public comment, and then you want to close the public hearing.
On each topic?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And we already had the public hearing for the short-term rentals, so we don't need to have another public hearing. But if you want to take public comment, that's up to the planning commission.
In public comment, you don't need a vote?
No.
Okay.
Commissioner Burton's trying to get on, so he'll be with us shortly. The quorum in just a minute. Sorry for the baseball cap tonight, but I have been using this chemo cream on my head and my face, and I probably don't look that presentable, but you're stuck with me nonetheless. So
I just figured you had a bad hair day.
yeah, you and I, you know how that goes.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's good hair days every day.
It's not fair. I'm jealous.
Yeah, hopefully you guys see Jeff on there yet?
Not yet.
Yeah. I'm just going to hop back on and keep making phone calls to a few others. I tried Chris and left a message, but I'll get on and try Commissioner Waldrop and Jack.
Yeah, we're a little bit off of our normal schedule, so I could see that maybe someone wasn't anticipating a meeting today versus next week, which is traditionally the fourth or week in the month.
I found a message from John on my answering machine, and he said he'd see me tonight. So I know John was counting on it this evening.
As in Jack Howell, John?
I meant Jack Howe, I'm sorry.
I think he goes by John sometimes, doesn't he?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, Scott.
Yep.
Will you have Steve or someone in the office up there send the link over to Commissioner Hoag?
Yeah.
I can't find it.
Hey, Felix, did you hear that? Could you send the Zoom link for tonight's meeting over to Chris Hoag?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Hey, Scott, do we
Yep.
have any minutes tonight?
You know, I don't think Angela had those on the agenda.
Okay. I see Commissioner Burton. Welcome. Commissioners may want to take themselves off mute. Okay, Director Grover, you want to get started?
Yeah, we have on the legislative items, you can see we have some of the same items that we had on the last agenda. We got to the short-term rentals, but we didn't get to the other three items on there. And then we also have the work session item on there dealing with Old Town and New Town Eden, discussing the area plans for those areas. So if you'd like, Commissioner, we could start with short-term rentals and just kind of work our way down in the next 15 minutes on any questions that you as the Planning Commission might have before we start the meeting.
Sounds good. Let's start from the top.
Okay, Scott, you want to hop on there?
Yeah. So for short-term rentals, the first on the agenda, So I sent over, well, I guess in the packet, there was a memo that explained kind of what has transpired since October 27th, our last meeting, and then today's meeting. And in a nutshell, what we did as staff was we went back and we clarified the business as usual scenario. And then we also made the proof of concept scenario. They're very similar, but we made them clearly distinct in that the business as usual is as if we are not even discussing short-term rentals. We just kind of forget that we are going down any path. We keep our current enforcement as is. We don't have any third-party enforcement. The current zones where they're allowed stays the same. So it's literally business as usual. The regulation that we currently have in the code doesn't change. We don't do anything different as far as enforcement or augmentation of any sort. Just business as usual. And then the proof of concept scenario that we were talking about at the last meeting is a clarification of the business as usual in that we're not changing where we're allowing short-term rentals. So all the zoning stays the same, but we are going to try out the third-party enforcement, see how that program works. And then we would also instigate the draft ordinance for operation and licensing requirements. Everybody who is in an existing allowed area is playing by the same rules. We have the enforcement in place so we can test that out and give it a go. So those are the clarifications between the business as usual and then the proof of concept that was requested. There was also one small change in the draft ordinance. Mr. Clark Duelman had reached out to us and offered to give us some advice on the private covenants language in the ordinance with regards to HOAs and properties that may be subject to a private covenant, and he provided some insight on some language. So the spirit of the language doesn't change, but it is clarified based on Mr. Duelman's comments. So we provided those as red lines, but we're still working on finalizing any last minute changes. And of course, our legal counsel will be taking a look at it. Cortland's already started to take a look at that proposed language. So there may be some tweaks here and there, but just as an FYI, we do appreciate Mr. Duelman's effort to provide us with some cleaner language on those points. But that's all that we did as far as the ordinance and cleaning up the scenarios is concerned. We did hold a public hearing with the Western Weber Planning Commission back on the 10th. So just last week, and we gave them the scenarios the same as we had given you guys on the 27th, and they agree with the path that you guys are taking, and they wanted to table their motion until you guys up in the valley had a chance to make a motion and set a direction on this, and then they would come back at their next meeting and see what direction you guys took, and then make a motion themselves. So that's all that has transpired on the short-term rentals item.
Okay.
Any questions on that? Okay. You guys want to talk about the next one on the agenda? So the second agenda item is with regards to the conference center use in various zones up in the valley. As you guys have seen on a past agenda, there is a conditional use permit that we're working through internally here as staff for a conference center in the FV3 zone. And that application is vested under the existing code where it is a conditional use in the FE3 zone. And so we're working through that conditional use permit internally, but it did spur some discussion on whether or not a conference center is an appropriate use in the FE3 zone or any of the other valley zones that are primarily residential in nature. So we'd like to chat about that and propose potentially removing that as a conditional use in the FE3 zone, and that's also in the FR1 zone. So we've put together a little bit of analysis, and we'll kind of talk through those two zones and whether or not that use makes sense in those areas. Any questions on that item? Okay.
Kylie, you want to hop on about storage units?
Yeah, happy to. So you guys have seen this language before for the storage units. Primary concern is the allowance of storage units in the CV2 zone. CV2 is most often found in areas where you'll find a gateway to a community or right within the heart of the community. And we've permitted a couple of storage unit facilities over there by the town of Huntsville that have garnered a little bit of concern as essentially being the landmark gateway for the Huntsville or East Huntsville area, and what that may represent to visitors, essentially as a community. And so we embarked on changing the ordinance so that if somebody was going to propose indoor storage units or a storage unit facility, that they would be required essentially to provide street-oriented commercial space on the ground level and bring that space up to the right-of-way. So essentially, we're looking at framing the right-of-way with some kind of a retail or commercial operation that has a certain amount of window space and sidewalk, and essentially it would be the beginning for these parcels, the beginning of Old Town Eden, New Town Eden, or anywhere else where you may see the CV2 zone, pedestrian-oriented, walkable, commercial shopping experience. And then the storage units would be able to be located behind that street-oriented commercial space, whether in a different building or in the same building, but behind space that's reserved for retail. It wouldn't matter. So a little bit of architectural standards for those buildings. It's kind of dipping our toe in the water in looking at standards and what kind of standards could be applied to buildings within these village centers. It's a pretty light version of it, but whet your palate on what you might see when it comes to Old and New Town Eden. Also, the other thing that we did here, and the reason why the proposal looks as long as it does, in Weber County Land Use Code, we've got two different commercial chapters, one for C1, C2, and C3, and one for CV1 and CV2. You find CV1 and 2 in the valley, you find C1, 2, and 3 out west. The chapters are based on the exact same framework. In fact, in most cases, it's got the exact same language. If you go through the use table, the CV1 and CV2 zone clearly got the standards that are in there, or excuse me, the uses allowed in there from the C1, C2, and C3. My assumption is that it was just copied and pasted back in 1998 when the CV1 and CV2 zones were created. And then each use was isolated for whether or not it did belong in the valley or not. It's just redundant ordinance. And when you get that type of redundancy, because our ordinances are plenary, meaning if it's not listed, it's not allowed. If you hyper specify a use that's allowed in the CV1 or CV2 zone, and it's not specified that way in a C1 or C2 zone, it could be construed as not being allowed in the C1 or C2 zone. So, or vice versa. The better thing to do, and planning commissioners who have been on the planning commission for a while now, you can recall working on the use tables. A better thing to do is to consolidate them together so you could see how they all apply. And there'd be less errors in that way. So we're not eliminating any zones, we're just putting them all in the same chapter and using the same language to talk about them. Questions about that?
Good.
Okay.
You want to give a quick synopsis on the weeds?
Yeah, that one is, it's a paragraph and pretty easy to read. We're just trying to put a height limitation on how tall your grass and weeds can be. And also make it pretty clear that the landowner is responsible for the vegetation that's growing in the park strip. The original proposal, as you can see in there, suggests that the landowner is responsible for maintaining the vegetation all the way out to the edge of asphalt if there's no curb and gutter. Western Weber Planning Commission had a hard time with that. They've got pretty deep borrow pits up there, and they don't really want to be standing right on the asphalt on these substandard streets with cars flying by at 50 miles an hour trying to knock down some of those weeds. And so What they suggested I do is rewrite it to say that when there's curb and gutter or a deferral agreement for curb and gutter, the landowner is responsible, but when there's not, they're not responsible. So you don't see that exact language in there, but this will be modified essentially to satisfy that for Western Weaver.
Charlie, I have a question. What about a pathway?
So pathway has already been provided for. We've got an ordinance that requires the adjacent landowner to maintain a pathway that is adjoining their property. And I think we, when I say maintain, we're not talking about, resurfacing or anything like that. We're essentially saying clear the weeds and keep it free for pedestrian traffic in terms of both vegetation and snow removal. And we did carve out an exception, if I do recall, we did carve out an exception for very large parcels so that people who have 20 acres aren't, snow plowing miles worth of snow.
Will that be referenced back to that one or what?
No, it could be, but they are in separate sections of the code. So yeah, I could provide a reference to show that. Any other comments, questions, concerns?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Burton. There's a sentence in here that you've got to maintain the right of way so it does, the property's appearance does not detract from the appearance of the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in a rural setting like we are in the valley, and there's all this natural vegetation all over the valley, and now we're going to make the land along the roadway not look natural because now it's mowed down to 6 inches. Is that detracting from the appearance of the neighborhood?
It's a subjective question or subjective language, right? What is attractive and what isn't attractive? It's going to be a little bit like Justice Scalia said obscenity is. Yeah, I know it when I see it.
No,
and
I'm
it's not
talking
always
about
the best way to go, but
in the rural setting up here, we try to preserve all the natural vegetation.
right.
Now, are we calling natural vegetation weeds?
Not necessarily. No. If it's a noxious weed, then yes, it would be
Okay.
considered. So if you have Dyer's woad growing, at the very least, you want to be nipping that before it goes to seed, but you should be pulling the whole thing out.
So is this only talking about noxious weeds?
No, it's also talking about non-ornamental grasses. So if you've got turf grass or other types of grasses that are growing out there, you need to maintain the height on those. Now, when we say 6 inches, height limitation on 6 inches, that's just a shot in the dark. If you guys want to do 12 inches, that's fine too.
Also, too, Commissioner, one thing that will address this is with Western Weaver's comments, looking at the right-of-way only being an issue if there's actual curb and gutter and improvements made. So in all the other areas, it wouldn't be an issue. We would just keep it as is. There wouldn't be any change to that. So if we adopted what Western Weaver is proposing, it wouldn't be an issue up in the valley. All our right-of-ways would stay as is, except our noxious weed ordinance would trump that, which would be, Dyer's woad, thistle, things like that.
Right.
Okay, so, and the intent, Charlie, is to change the ordinance for the valley to be like Western Weaver's.
Yeah, or what Western Weaver recommended. So the Western Weaver hasn't adopted this yet either. So both planning commissions are, this hasn't been adopted to apply in Western Weaver yet. It's just we wanted to get it through both planning commissions before we got it in front of the county commission. But yeah, if we can get them to look pretty similar, I think that would be best. But if the Ogden Valley, if you guys feel like you've got a pretty substantially different setting up there, where the vegetation within the park strip behind the curb should be allowed to be natural or whatever the desire is, then we could write a separate ordinance.
Yeah. I'm just trying to wrap my mind around how something can be rural and something can be downtown Ogden with park strips that you have to go mow.
Well, that's actually going to tie really well into our work session discussion because we're going to talk a little bit about rights of way and rights of way standards and what rural really is and whether or not there is going to be curb and gutter along these road rights of way anyway in the future. So yeah, stay tuned for that.
And this ordinance has no effect on the Forest Service.
Forest Service is exempt. That's correct.
That's
Forest Service is exempt from our land use
So
regulations.
the entire perimeter of the lake, whether it is adjacent to a pathway or a roadway, is exempt. So
Right.
that'll look like it's always looked.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Any other questions?
That'll continue to look rural.
It will. It will. Well, and I think most of our other roadways are going to continue to look rural as well, as you'll see in the presentation at the end of the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
You ready to get started, John? Commissioner Lewis, Chair Lewis?
Yeah, okay, I'd like to welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to November 17, 2020, on Valley Planning Commission. With us today, we have Commissioner Lackey, Commissioner Francis, Commissioner Howell, Commissioner Burton, Commissioner Hogue, myself, Commissioner Lewis, and absent today is Commissioner Waldrop. Why don't we go ahead and do the Pledge of Allegiance next? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. First of all, commissioners, has there been any ex parte communications, or are there any conflicts of interest to declare on the topics tonight? None seen. Okay. I don't believe there's any minutes to approve tonight. There's no consent agenda. So we'll go ahead and go to the first legislative item. We've discussed this quite a lot. The first item is about short-term rentals. Scott, I understand you're going to be distilling these down into several options for us to consider, and we're going to be basically trying to recommend to the commissioners our thoughts based on what we've heard, but ultimately it's going to be their decision. Why don't you go ahead and start with ZDA 2020-05.
Yep, thanks, Chair. I'm going to share my screen here real quick. Okay. Commissioners, you've seen this presentation, but I've updated it based on a few things we discussed at the last meeting. But we'll run through it here real quick. There are some updated numbers on the public participation on this topic. As you know, we've been taking public comment on this since August, and we've kept a cumulative total of everybody's comments to date. So since our last meeting on the 27th of October, we've had several more individuals submit written comments, so we've updated those comments. You'll notice that we've had a couple of percentages go down just a little bit, but just by a little. We've had more people kind of comment on property values, some in support of short-term rentals. And so you see some of the numbers in green that have gone up ever so slightly to reflect those individuals who have submitted comments on those topics. But by and large, the ranking of concerns and issues associated with short-term rentals hasn't changed. So we still have kind of the same hierarchy of concerns. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on those comments? And I should mention, everybody's comments as part of the public record have been saved. We have actually uploaded all those comments to the Frontier webpage, which is a project portal that's open for individuals who want to download any of these documents. So if you want to go onto the Frontier system, the Weber County Frontier system, you can access that through the Weber County Planning webpage. You'll scroll down to where it says development projects. You'll click on that link and it'll get you to Frontier, and then you can just search for short-term rentals, and this project will pop up. And then all of these documents are on the documents tab. Okay. So commissioners, as a reminder, we talked about a couple of different scenarios during the last meeting. We had 4 scenarios. We had the open scenario, the open and limited scenario, the business as usual scenario, and then the closed scenario. And these are all kind of dealing with what should we do with short-term rentals, where should they be allowed, and how should we regulate them. We talked about these 4 scenarios, and the outcome of that meeting resulted in a desired 5th scenario, which we're calling the proof of concept scenario. And this proof of concept scenario we'll talk about here in just a minute, but we'll run through each of these scenarios real quick for anybody who has not seen these so they understand what these scenarios mean. But the open scenario is pretty simple. We would allow short-term rentals in any residential area in the county. And we would use a third-party enforcement company to help us enforce regulations that we would put into place. So operational standards, licensing requirements, tax remittance, etc. So that's the open scenario. It's the least restrictive. The open and limited scenario is very similar. It would be open to all residential areas in the county with exception to the FR1 zone, which is the Ogden Canyon. So in all the other areas, we would then allow for short-term rentals to occur. However, it would be further limited because we would have a buffer around each of the licensed properties. So we can talk about that buffer. I mean, it could be a big buffer or a small buffer, depending on how close or how far apart we want these to be. But the idea being that they wouldn't congregate in small areas. We wouldn't have short-term rentals next door to each other. But we would still use a third-party enforcement company to help augment our enforcement efforts to make sure everybody's playing by the same rules and we have a good neighbor renters. So that's the open and limited scenario. So it's open, it is limited in some regards. The business as usual scenario is as if we aren't changing anything. We stay the same with where short-term rentals are allowed. We wouldn't enforce these any more than we currently are, so we wouldn't be employing a third-party enforcement company. And then we most likely would not be putting into effect any additional ordinance requirements for operational standards. Everybody would still have to get a business license as they do today or a conditional use permit in certain areas, but it's business as usual. Nothing changes from today's requirements. So here's the proof of concept scenario. This is a scenario that the Planning Commission wanted us to clarify as a potential step towards a recommendation to the County Commission. And in this scenario, we are taking the business as usual scenario, but we're adding the third-party enforcement. So we're not changing where they're allowed. They're only allowed in the current locations. So only in the DRR1 zone or as a conditional use permit in the FR3 zone. The language, it remains unchanged. The language you see here is the existing language that wouldn't change. But we would employ third-party enforcement to test out that, that scenario. So we would contract with one of these companies, we would track the rentals, we would try to enforce the illegal rentals in the areas where they're not allowed. But we would also enforce the operational standards for everybody who is in a legal area. So if you're in a legal area, you'll still have to comply with parking requirements. You have to require maximum occupancy and trash collection and all those types of operational requirements. So that's the proof of concept scenario. It's similar to the business as usual, but we would be using the third-party enforcement, trying out that system, and then requiring that people conform to the operational and licensing requirements. Okay, and then the last scenario is a closed scenario. So this is a scenario where we start to kind of close off short-term rentals over time. So we would still continue to allow them in the DRR1 zone, which is the resort zones. Except for grandfathered licensees, we would no longer be allowing them as conditional uses in the FR3 zone. So we would no longer allow those to happen. And as grandfathered uses were to fail to renew their licenses or sell their properties, they would not be transferable. So we'd start to close that off. And then also in PRUD developments. So in new PRUD developments, we would no longer be approving short-term rentals as an option in new subdivisions. But owners within existing PRUD subdivisions, if they were approved for short-term rental use initially, they would be allowed to obtain the license and continue renting, but only in those grandfathered cases. In this closed scenario, we would not change our enforcement, so we would not be contracting with a third-party enforcement company, and we would not be putting into effect any new operational requirements or standards. So that's the closed scenario. So that's all 5 of those scenarios. Again, the proof of concept was the scenario we wanted to clarify as a potential recommendation by the Planning Commission to the County Commission. So that's kind of what we did. We went back and we created this scenario for additional discussion. We continued to take public comments, which we've shown you the updated information there. I'd be happy to go through some of the operational standards and licensing requirements, but I think we all kind of have an understanding as to what those would be. They're not applicable in all of these scenarios, but only in the scenarios where we would perhaps have that third-party enforcement company hired to help us enforce the short-term rentals. Any questions on that?
Okay, well, Scott, I appreciate the summary. Commissioners, I would suggest this, and if you want to do something different, I'm totally fine with that too. But to kind of distill this down into the months and months we've spent on this, I mean, it just seems to me that the open scenario where you can just do any of it, anything is rentable, that seems a little extreme to me. The closed scenario where nothing's rentable doesn't seem very practical. The business as usual isn't really working. And I think that's what we've kind of started off saying, well, it's sort of working now, but it's getting worse and we're having things jump up in the middle of nowhere. So it almost seems like our discussion ought to be focused on either leave it the way it is, but add a third-party component to it. The proof of concept scenario to see if we can control what we currently have and then expand it maybe, or if we go to renting it but in a limited fashion, so the open limited scenario. So to me, it kind of comes down between 2 and 4. First of all, does anybody see the other ones as more viable, or are the 2 practical to the point?
I have a comment. I believe even closed is applicable. And my reasoning for that is that currently in Eden alone, when you take all of the different PRUDs and Wyndhams and Moose Hollow, Wolf Lodge, just all of the bridges, all the different units available for short-term rentals. Without Powder Mountain, it adds up to about approximately 833 units available for nightly rentals. And currently, the Ogden Valley News delivers papers to Eden and Liberty, which go to the Eden Post Office. Approximately 1,840 residents. So if you have 833 of those 1,840 residents that can be used as nightly rentals, and that's not even with Powder Mountain, we're up to almost 50% of the units in Eden that can be used as short-term rentals. And that's with, a lot of those are in the DDR, or they already have license to do so, or in the PRUD that they can do so. And so many communities put a cap on how many short-term rentals can be in their community. And where we're almost at 50%, easily I would say 40%, I don't think there's any room for any more. night short-term rentals in Eden. Huntsville has the Ski Lake Village areas. I don't see where there's even room with any more. I would not, I don't think it's unreasonable at all to say that we have enough short-term rentals at this time with those percentages to choose the closed scenario. So that's what I would like to submit. I would like to see some consideration of that and not take it off the table.
John, Jack Howell.
Okay, I guess my only issue with that is you're counting all the different places that could have rentals, not necessarily the ones that are rentals. So yeah, we probably have 800 things that are in zone for rentals, but if nobody uses them as rentals, one thing, and if everybody uses them as rentals, it's another. That kind of complicates that a little bit for me.
A majority of those are used though for short-term rentals. Wolf Lodge, Wolf Creek, Moose Hollow, Wyndham, all the condos behind the pool area down there. There are over the top amount of units that are currently being used for short-term rentals. And then you throw in everything else that are just single family residents up in the Wolf Creek community. So, I mean,
Okay,
really,
well, that's
40
an option. We
at
can shut down
40%,
all rentals.
40 to 50% already that can be used. That's over the top. And most communities, that's not acceptable.
Okay, do anybody else have any suggestions?
John.
Which one of these?
Jack
Yeah.
My view is that I would either go for business as usual scenario or proof of concept scenario. That would be my choice.
Okay.
Chair Lewis, this is Commissioner Lackey. So in my opinion, the only option that makes sense is the proof of concept. And as you said earlier, what is happening today is not working. And I've had several residents in the Valley, complain, hey, the house next door is now a rental. And I hear it over and over and over. And without enforcement, we're kind of wasting our time. So my vote is going to be for the proof of concept.
This Commissioner,
Go ahead.
I'm just recalling the many times we have discussed this in the past few weeks or months. And it seems if my memory is correct, we always came to the conclusion that without enforcement, we have nothing. It doesn't matter what the law says. If you don't enforce it, it doesn't matter. And we've come around to the idea that we ought to see if this third-party enforcement really works. And that we would start with, let's enforce what we've already got before opening up more areas or adding more complexity to it. And so I agree with Commissioner Lackey. I think the proof of concept scenario is kind of where our discussions have been leading, and that's what I fully support. I like
well, Commissioner Francis, I might also say, sorry, go ahead.
I recall Commissioner Francis's, I think it was she that said in our last meeting, these short-term rentals, this is a business operation, and it really shouldn't be in a residential neighborhood. It's a commercial operation, kind of. Long-term rentals, something else, but short-term rentals, that's a business. And we get in trouble when we start opening up residential areas to that. We lose our community character. So yeah, for that reason, I support proof of concept is really the only option makes sense to me.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in terms of Commissioner Francis's comment, you might do the proof of concept and find out it doesn't work. That we can't handle that many rentals. You may end up with a closed scenario after you try enforcement. You know, it's entirely possible that you'll find out it didn't work, but either way, it's not working.
John Howell, my view is we won't know
Commissioner
until you-
Hogue, did you start?
Yes, Commissioner, this is Commissioner Hogue. I agree that we have to get a handle on the regulation of it. You know, in other words, having the ability to keep what the current laws or what the current ordinances require, so that we can have a better picture of what can or cannot happen, and keep our minds open. Honestly, I agree with some of the concepts from Commissioner Francis. As far as, my biggest question is, where does it end? It makes me feel in a lot of ways that the community is potentially, and I'm not saying it is, but it could potentially be kind of pushed out. And so I think we got to get a handle on the regulation of the way it currently is. So probably the proof of concept temporarily, at least at this point in time, is where I would lean.
Okay, well, to be expeditious about this, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. Commissioner Burton, I move we recommend to the county commission the option D, proof of concept, be our recommendation for our initial recommendation on how we move forward with the short-term rental problem or issue in the valley. Do we adopt number D, proof of concept?
I'll second that, Chair Lewis.
Okay, commissioners, further comments?
Would you
Okay.
consider, I do have a comment. Would anyone be interested in or modifying that no more could be approved for maybe even a period of a year or something? Put a cap on it for a while, see how it works. Recommending putting a cap on it for now. Would you consider amending your motion?
The thought in my motion is this is kind of like, how do you eat an elephant? It's got to be one bite at a time. And this is a huge elephant of an issue up here in the valley. Without enforcement, we have nothing. It's just going to choke.
Right. I believe in enforcement.
So I think if we do this enforcement, there's tons of these things that are operating contrary to the zoning ordinances. Those will be eliminated right off the bat, we hope, if enforcement is effective. So we've got to know, no matter what we have, there's got to be an enforcement. This gives us an opportunity to enforce within existing zoning. So we're taking a little bite here to see how can we enforce anything, or do we have to come up with some different method to enforce things? So it seems to just keep it simple, keep it clean. That's why I just thought, let's adopt D. If we get into no more are allowed, even if they are allowed, then that seems we get into we're messing with zoning that already exists that said they're allowed. We're messing with PRUDs that allow them. It's back to the concept of when people purchase their home in a zone that doesn't allow it. well, they ought to be entitled to have it not allowed. On the other hand, if they purchased it where it was to be allowed, they have an expectation that I hate to mess with by cutting it off for a year. So that was the intent of trying to simplify my motion.
May I have a time for another comment on that?
Sure.
For instance, if you did put a cap on it in the closed scenarios, they're still allowed where they're allowed in PRUDs. So there's no confusion on that. It basically just takes it out of the, and also in the resort areas. It just takes out the FR, is it the FR3?
That's correct.
So it doesn't really convolute or confuse the current zoning. It just says that in future PRUDs that there would be no more.
John Howell with a comment.
Yep.
This
Go ahead.
subject can be brought up at another time if we need to be, or refine it. That can happen. It does, you don't have to put a time limit on it. You can just, if something is going wrong or it needs something else or another ordinance to be added to it, it can be.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and vote on it. If you want to see a different motion, just vote this one down. But I think we need to move forward one way or the other. So as the motion stands, all those in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed?
I
Okay, motion carries. Okay, we're going on to our second topic tonight. We're going to do a short public hearing this time to discuss and take comment and potentially take action on a county initiated proposal to amend various zones for conference centers. Scott, you want to go ahead and present this?
Yeah. So commissioners, what you should be able to see this. Can you see a new table being shown? Does that pop up for you there?
Yes.
Okay. So this was a county-driven request. We had a conference center requested it as a conditional use in the or FV Forest Valley 3 zone up in the canyon. And in that zone, the FV3 zone, a conference center is allowed as a conditional use. And so we took in an application. We're working through that conditional use application internally, and it'll be on your agenda shortly. But it did spur some discussion as to whether or not a conference center was an appropriate use in some of the residential zones in the valley. So just to give you guys an overview, this table here shows where this use, conference education center, is allowed. So in the zoning ordinances, this use shows up in the conditional use list as either as a conference education center. So it's a permitted use in the DRR1 zone, so the resort zone. It's listed as a conditional use in the CVR1, Commercial Valley Resort Recreation 1 zone, the FR1 zone, which is the canyon, the Forest Valley 3 zone, the Forest Residential 3 zone, so FR3, and then all the forest zones, F5, F10, and F40. And then the rest of the zones that are in the valley where it's not permitted is in the gravel zone, manufacturing, commercial, RE20, RE15, shoreline, and open space. And so what I've done is I've organized this table in descending use. So the most intensive use is at the top. So in the not permitted section here, gravel is the most intensive, and then manufacturing and commercial valley 2, 1, and so forth. And so as you progress up this table, you see kind of the intensity of the uses here. But also, when we're reading through each of the zones, purposes and intents, there's a paragraph in each zoning ordinance that lays out the purpose and intents of each zone. We noticed that a couple of these zones were primarily residential in nature, but still had a conference center as a conditional use in the zoning ordinance. So we wondered if it was an appropriate use. So in the staff report, what I did is I pulled out all of these zones and the purpose and intents paragraphs for each of the zones to see what was the general intent of each of these zones. So in the forest zone, forest 5, 10, and 40, for example, the intent is to protect and preserve the natural environment of those areas of the county that are characterized by mountains, forests, or naturalistic land, and to permit development compatible to the preservation of these areas. So then the objectives in establishing the forest zone are to promote the use of land for forest, fish, and wildlife, and to facilitate the conservation of natural resources, reduce hazards, flood and fire, prevent sanitation and pollution. But this number 4 was interesting. It says to provide areas of private and public recreation and recreation resorts. So in the forest zones, we kind of contemplated those zones as being potentially for recreation and resort use. So maybe a conference center does fit in there somehow, some way. In the CVR1 zone, when we read through these uses or the intent of these zones, we see things such as service facilities, primarily commercial in nature. So perhaps in the CVR1 zone, conference center may make sense. In the FR1 zone, however, we see language that indicates that it's residential or intended to provide area for residential development. So perhaps the FR1 zone isn't the best. But as a caveat, the FR1 zone is currently require that a conference center be on a property of at least 5 acres. So there is that little caveat in the current zoning ordinance that does allude to a larger property perhaps being eligible for conditional use in a conference center in the FR1. So that's in the canyon. Similarly, in the Forest Valley zone, the intent here is that we have an area for residential development. So maybe the FR3 zone is in the best location. The FR3 zone, we see a more intensive use. So for example, condo hotels, adjacent to major recreation resorts, areas associated with major recreation resorts. And then lastly, the DRR1 zone obviously is primarily resort centered. So a conference center may make sense. So really the two, I think that is perhaps not the best location is FE3 and FR1. And primarily due to the residential component of these two zones. Do you have any questions or comments on the zones in which this use shows up as either a permitted or a conditional use, and where maybe in those residential areas a conference center may not be the best use? Okay. As far as staff is concerned, our recommendation here is that we remove the conditional use from both the FR1 and the FE3 zones. Just so you're aware, that's the recommendation in the staff report, but wanted to open that up for consideration and discussion.
Scott, this is Commissioner Burton. I have a question.
Yep.
There's this I'm missing the word, where people go and stay at a farm or something. And
agritourism.
Yeah. Would a conference center be a part of agritourism?
That's a good question. We can pop up the definition here of agritourism and take a look at that just to see what the intent of that would be.
Because that's allowed in these two zones, isn't it?
I believe. Are you guys able to see my screen here? One sec here. There we go. Okay. Agritourism. So the term agritourism means an agricultural accessory use that can provide a means of diversifying a farm's income through broadening its offerings and adding value to its products. They operate during more than 6 days per year and provide agriculture related and in some instances non-agriculture related products and activities that attract members of the public to the farm for retail, educational, recreational, and or general tourism purposes. So I don't see anything in there particularly to a conference center, but as you'll recall, the use in, let me go back to the ordinance here. The use that we're talking about is the conference component, but not the education component. So as we get into the ordinance here, you'll see that in the list, it does indicate conference dash education center. So the proposal is just to remove the conference component, but leave the education component. So if you have an agritourism operation, you'd be able to continue having that education component with it.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions on that? Any concerns with the staff recommendation to remove that use as a conditional use from those two zones? Okay. We do have this listed as a public hearing, so we do need to open and close that and get public comment, if any.
Let's go ahead and take a quick vote. All those in favor of opening a public hearing? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we have a open hearing. If anyone would like to speak to this, let's see, who is moderating? Is that you, Scott, or somebody else?
We've got Marta downstairs moderating. I'm not sure if we have anybody in the chambers or not.
We don't
Okay.
have anyone in the chambers.
Just put it up with a reaction or emoji, and we'll call on you if there's anybody on this.
I'm showing Kay Hoogland.
Okay.
No comments. I withdraw my hand.
Jan Fulmer.
No comment on this one. Withdraw my hand.
I don't show any other hands.
Okay. Marta, if you don't see anybody else, I'll go ahead and close or take a vote to close the public hearing. All those in favor of closing the public hearing? Okay,
Aye.
say aye. Any opposed? Okay. The public hearing is closed. Commissioners, I'll entertain a motion on this one.
I'll make a motion. John Howell.
Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Howell.
I want to make a motion to recommend to amend and approval to the County Commission file number ZTA 2020-8 that zones F5, F10, F4, CVR1, CR3, and DDR1 may be appropriate for any conference center use with a conditional use permit. And the zones F 1 and FB3 are primarily intended for residential development with low density and are not appropriate for any conference center type development. And FR1 and FB3 be removed as a conditional use in these zones. This motion is based on the findings listed in the staff report.
Okay, a fine motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that. Commissioner Hoag.
Okay. Any comments?
Stay down.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Okay. ZTA 2020-8 passed. All right. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move to our third item tonight, ZTA 2019-6. That's a public hearing and consideration and possible action. Certain sections provide design standards for indoor storage units, etc. Charlie, I guess you're going to be presenting this tonight.
I will be. Apologize. Hang on 1 second. Let me get it pulled up here. Okay. Sorry, when I pulled up the slideshow, it pulled up right over top of the meeting. Let me share my screen with you. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Oh, actually might be on the wrong side there. Does it say storage unit design standards?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, that's what we're going for. So the proposal that you guys have in front of you is to add design standards for storage units in the CV2 zone. It does a little bit more than that as well. So, but to start off with the design standards, we're looking at providing street-oriented commercial uses. So they're street-facing, hopefully become pedestrian-oriented commercial uses in time. And then uses that will provide a street level window and door opening experience. So you'll see the word fenestration is in there. Fenestration is often used by architects as the door and window openings of a building. And so there's a certain percentage of that ground floor that needs to be a door or window opening, something that is attractive to a potential pedestrian or passerby. And then the second story, if there is one in these types of facilities, even if there's a storage facility on the second level, they would still need to provide window openings for 30% of the wall space. That way that the building itself, it looks like a building that is common on kind of a main street look. Or in these village areas. Other changes you'll see beyond providing standards. So those standards are intended to be on the building that faces the street and is at the street. If the landowner wants to do storage units that are in that same building, either above or behind that commercial space, they can. Like I said, the upper level needs to still look like it's not necessarily storage units. And the bay doors to the storage units need to face away from the street, and so they could put it on the back side of that same building. Alternatively, they can have another building or another series of buildings behind that first building that holds that street frontage that has those bay doors for those indoor storage units. The other thing that this proposal does is it consolidates redundancies. So right now you've got two commercial chapters in your land use code. Title 104, Chapter 20, and Title 104, Chapter 21. And I understand why these two different chapters were created separate from each other. One regulates commercial uses in Western Weber, one regulates commercial uses in Ogden Valley. However, if you were to read these it's really easy to see the overlap in them. Because of the redundancy between the two, it's really, it is potentially, let's just say it's easier to create, potentially create mistakes in administration. For example, if in one zone, in chapter 20, for example, the use, a very specific use is called out as being either allowed or not allowed. Just by the very nature of it not being listed as a use in the other chapter, the next chapter over, means it's not allowed in that use. So in other words, the zones are plenary. If it's not listed, it's not allowed. And if you get hyper-specific in one zone, but you say nothing in another zone, then that hyper-specific thing is on its face not allowed in that other zone. When you stitch these two chapters together into just a single chapter, you're not going to run across those kinds of issues because it's going to be clear whether it is allowed or isn't allowed. I think that would help with the administration of the code. It will keep us out of some legal murky water in the future. In doing so, just to be clear, I had to take some interpretive measures on whether or not some uses should be allowed in CV2 and CV1 zones, as well as over in the C1, C2, and C3 zones. And so I hope that you guys have had the opportunity just to review that list, see what is proposed to be allowed and not allowed. I did my best to stay as consistent as I could be with the existing ordinance, but there were a couple of new uses from one side to the other that I had to take some interpretation on and see how, you know, and determine whether or not it should be applied in those other zones. Just had another thought, but it escaped me. The other thing that we tried to address here is to better regulate the definition and the allowance for outdoor storage. So right now, our codes aren't super clear about when storage is allowed to be outside. We do know that a contractor storage yard, for example, which is allowed in the MV1 zone, that's allowed to have storage outside because we know that it's intended to be a yard for storage. But we don't ever explicitly state outdoor storage. We had an individual in the M1 zone recently proposed to do RV storage. We were under the impression that our ordinance wouldn't allow storage outside. But as you get into the M1 zone, and again, this is out west, so it didn't apply to the Ogden Valley. As you get into the M1 zone, we're not specific. And so our legal advisors told us that if we didn't want to get into a messy lawsuit, it's probably better just to give them the outdoor storage license for the RVs and then change our code to be clear. So that's what we're doing here. Outdoor storage is enabled explicitly in the M2 and in the M3 zone. But if you look at the land use tables of the C1, C2, C3, CV1, and CV2 zone that I've proposed in that packet for you, it also explicitly prohibits them. So what you guys have in front of you is basically you've got three options. You can approve it, you can, you can recommend it for approval, you can recommend it for denial, or you can table it. And the recommendations would then be forwarded to the county commission for their final decision. Any questions for me?
Charlie, Commissioner Burton. So
Yeah.
trying to wrap my mind around what you're saying. The idea that you want to consolidate Western Weber and Ogden Valley permitted uses in these zones to be consistent. The same, upper and lower valley.
No. So the zones for the Ogden Valley, which is the CV1 zone and the CV2 zone, they have different allowances than the zones in Western Weber in some cases. Those different allowances wouldn't change, except in instances where there is a very specific use allowed in one of the C zones in Western Weber, that is not referenced or mentioned at all in one of the CV zones in the Ogden Valley. In those cases, I just took an interpretation and either allowed it or didn't allow it based on whether or not it fit the general plan, whether or not it fit the community in that particular area. And I can point one or two out if you'd like me to do so.
Okay, I'm just wondering if the problem is, unless it's explicitly allowed, it would be disallowed. Can't you accomplish the same thing by just saying in the upper valley, this controls, in the lower valley, this controls?
And we did that. Yeah, so if you look at the land use table, you'll see a C1 zone, a CV1 zone, a C2 zone, a CV2 zone, and then a C3 zone. And the Ogden Valley doesn't have a CV3 zone.
Right.
And so in the CV1 and CV2 zones, everything in that column is applicable only to the Ogden Valley. So that column controls only what's in the Ogden Valley. And in the C zones, 1, 2, and 3, those columns control only what's in Western Weaver.
Okay.
Charlie, John Howell,
Yes.
Charlie. Did I get that straight? Where Ogden Valley does not have a CV3 zone.
That's correct.
Is that okay?
That is correct.
I was worried about the used car lot. I'm always worried about having sprawling, I mean, they have them down below, but not up here, and always worried about that because that's always tacky, really, I think. I'm glad they're not, I'm glad their zone's not here.
Okay, so Charlie, I'm still not understanding this. You went through and using your best judgment decided what things that are maybe not allowed in the valley will be allowed that are allowed in the west, or vice versa?
Yeah, so let me guide your attention to the screen over here. In the Ogden Valley, we have a use called academies or studios for dance, art, sports, etc. That use is not listed anywhere in the current C1, C2, or C3 zone. And so taking the permission that the Ogden Valley placed on that use, so conditional in the CV1 and conditional in the or permitted in the CV2 zone, I did the same thing in Western Weaver and said, all right, if it's good enough for the CV1 zone, it should be good enough for the C1 zone as a conditional use. If it's good enough for the CV2 zone as a permitted use, it should be good enough for the C2 zone as a permitted use. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, and I did that throughout. And there are a couple of cases, for example, this one, altering, pressing, and repairing of wearing apparel. I just consolidated that into a tailor and related use, which is further down in the T's. But you'll still find that it is permitted in the same way in the CV1 and CV2 zone in this proposal as it was in what's in current code.
Okay, would someone altering clothing in his or her home be considered then more like a dry cleaner where you press and?
Or a tailor.
Yeah, okay.
Uh-huh.
All right, thank you.
You bet. Any other questions for me?
Okay. If for now, if no other commissioners have any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and entertain a motion to open it for public comment or public hearing. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll open it up for a public hearing. Anybody who would like to speak up, just put up an emoji or hand. Marta, you can select who wants to talk to this.
I don't see any hands.
Okay, anybody in the commission chambers?
No,
Hard to do this without being able to see anything.
nope.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take a motion to close public comment.
So moved. This is Shannon.
Okay, back to commissioners. Any further questions? Okay, so we either approve, deny, or table based on what we've heard. I'll go ahead and entertain a motion on this for recommendation or not recommendation
I'll make a motion.
or tabling.
I'll make a motion.
Okay,
I move that we recommend for approval ZTA 2019-06 in consideration of the staff recommendations and policy analysis that the staff provided. Is that adequate?
sounded good to me. Okay, do I have a second? Cortland?
Yes, Chair Lewis, if you can hear me, I don't remember a vote on the motion to close the public hearing. So you should probably, if I missed it, I'm sorry, but if you didn't do that, you should probably vote on that one first.
I took Commissioner Francis. This is so moved. I guess that's a shortcut. All right, so let's take a vote on closing the public hearing. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, public hearing's closed. Do I have a second on Commissioner Francis's motion?
Second
I
it.
think Commissioner Hoag is trying to second.
All right, yeah. I was
Okay,
muted.
we'll take a second from Commissioner Hoag. There you go. Thank you, Commissioner Hoag. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right, our last item on the legislative items tonight, and we will have a public hearing for this as well, is ZTA 2020-07, a public hearing on the height of weeds and turf grasses, etc. Charlie, why don't you go ahead and present this one?
Yeah, happy to do so. And Mr. Chairman, just to let you know, I don't know if you could tell, but it seems like maybe your internet's a little bit slow. You'll say something, I'll see your lips moving, but I won't hear the audio until a few seconds later, and then it's really fast and really jumbled. So if it sounds like somebody's talking over you, it's probably because they don't know you're talking.
My computer says I'm not stable. I don't know if that's good or bad.
It depends on whether or not your psychiatrist tells you that.
Yeah.
Long time ago.
So this is actually
Take it away.
This is a fairly short proposal, ordinance amendment. It basically, we've got some concerns about the height of grasses and weeds on some properties. A lot of different jurisdictions have ordinances that limit how tall your turf grasses can be. And so that's what this proposes to do. I'm going to be honest with you. And until the pre-meeting, I didn't put a lot of thought into the effect that this is going to have on properties that are kept in a natural state of vegetation. Because this would suggest that if there are any grasses there, including what maybe I don't know if cheatgrass is a noxious weed or not, but the weeds or the grasses you find on the natural hillside, those aren't intended to be manicured like turf grass is. I mean, the turf grasses, we've got a very strict definition for what turf grass is. It's not the same thing as the kind of straw grasses that you see out there. This isn't anything that would be applicable to agricultural uses, because those aren't turf grasses or weeds, those are crops. Nor is it intended to be applicable to pasture ground where it's intended for livestock. So primarily what we're trying to target is those areas that are detrimental to the community or the neighborhood because of how unkempt or unnatural the man-made vegetation essentially has become. So that's why you see what you see here. Let me, after the pre-meeting and the discussion, I got in here and kind of refined some of my thoughts on how we can execute what the Western Weaver Planning Commission has requested. Which they said, you know, they're uncomfortable getting out there with their weed whacker and getting down in some of their borrow ditches out there are 5-8 feet deep. I mean, they got to be really deep because it's really flat out there in order for any water to actually drain. They're concerned about being out there right next to a lane of travel, trying to get things mowed or knocked down. And so we did modify this proposal for them to suggest that this would only be applicable where curb and gutter either exists or should exist by deferral agreement. And so if the property has a deferral agreement recorded to the property, we would still expect them to you know, knock down those weeds out front. Questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, Charlie, Commissioner Burton.
Yeah.
I'm picturing some of the deep ditches up here and to the west. I mean, you've got what, almost a slough going along the side of the highway.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no practical reason for a landowner to climb down 10 feet in the ditch and clean out all that vegetation.
Yeah, that's right. And so if we go with what Western Weaver Planning Commission has asked we go with, they wouldn't be required to. Only if there's curb and gutter, or if there should be curb and gutter by deferral agreement, would they be expected to do so.
So Charlie, in the valley, I'm having a hard time thinking of very many places that have curb and gutter.
Me too.
So it's kind of, to me, a little bit of a moot point. I can understand where maybe there needs to be some kind of a, I mean, that makes some sense where you have a curb and gutter, but everywhere else in the valley, I can't see it being anything that anybody's going to do.
Yeah. And I mean, if just by the nature of not having curb and gutter in the valley or not having a deferral agreement for curb and gutter in the valley keeps this from not even applying, then it wouldn't apply.
Yeah.
I have a comment.
Sure.
So there are several neighborhoods in the valley that are part of deferral agreements for curb and gutter.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, I think this is also a health and safety issue. For example, well, for years, the county used to mow the sides of the roads. And there were reasons for that also. It was noxious weeds, or it can even be a fire damage or a hazard, people throwing things out the window. But also deer. Where I live, even in hills, when some of the neighbors haven't kept the weeds down along the edges of the road, a deer will fly through the weeds because they're quite tall, especially smaller, younger deer. So there's some good reasons why that's been a tradition to keep the edges of roads cleared.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you don't have sidewalk or curb and gutter. To me, it is a safety issue, and also a health issue too, with noxious weeds or whatever. So,
yeah, thank you for those comments. And the county isn't intending this as their way of not running a mower down the sides of these roads. The county still intends on doing that as frequently as we have the resources in doing so. I understand that the weed board, one has been set up and they're rocking and rolling with what their new requirements are from the county commission. And we still do have a mower and we still do take it around. It just isn't as frequent as it might be. So for example, if you've got irrigation, an irrigation system or a sprinkler system that extends out into the right of way, and you're irrigating those grasses, they're going to be pretty green grass, right? That the county mower, if it does go around maybe once a month, if even that, it's not intended to capture it's not intended to go around it in frequencies that would keep that irrigated grass down to a 6-inch standard. Just by nature of irrigating it, you're going to be growing a lot faster. And so if you're irrigating it, you're expected essentially to maintain it. If it's just the fallow, the straw grasses that typically grow on the sides of the road, hopefully by the time the mower gets out there, 2 or 3 passes a summer, and that's all it's going to need.
And if I may, one more comment. I don't need to beleaguer this point, but even for kids, for instance, in my neighborhood, where there's weeds and they're up to their knees or whatever, kids, then they go off when a car comes, even when a car comes, they don't walk through the weeds to get out of the way of the cars. They stay on the road. And dogs running out, whatever. I just think there's a lot of reasons that it makes sense to keep the weeds down to a decent level.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and open up to public hearing. Can I take a motion to open for public hearing?
Make a
All those
motion.
in favor? All those in favor?
It is
Aye. Opposed?
very good, very good.
Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and have a public hearing on this. If anybody would like to speak to this topic, just go ahead and put your emoji up and Marta will call on you. Anybody, Marta?
I don't see any hands.
Okay, anybody in the commission?
Nope.
Okay. I'll take a motion to close the public hearing.
Hey, hang on a sec, John.
Oh,
I do have
yeah,
a
one minute.
comment on this.
Okay, Ms. Mendez, please proceed.
Okay. I'm having a really hard time with this because I asked for Charlie to send me, this is Miranda Menzies here, 3807 North Elk Ridge Trail. And if you look at Elk Ridge Trail, you'll find it's in the Wolf Creek neighborhoods, and the Wolf Creek neighborhoods are curb and gutter. Curb and gutter, yes. And the county has responsibility for maintenance of the stormwater system. And we have catch basins that have been completely blocked for more than 5 years because the county does not do the maintenance, even though they demanded that curb and gutter be put in. So that's one thing we need to tackle. I'm just waiting for weeds to start growing out of the catch basins. The next thing is I see no mention in the actual amendment, and Charlie's going to have to tell me where curb and gutter is actually mentioned in this, that it's treated differently than the rest of the valley. Is it, you say it's the responsibility of the property owner, not the county, to maintain vegetation between the edge of the travel service and the edge of the public right-of-way. Where is the edge of the public right-of-way when there's a curb and gutter? Isn't it at the edge of the curb? Can somebody answer that one? And the last thing is this whole thing about Charlie having said that he didn't think about non-turf grass. One of the things we've been doing up here in Wolf Creek, it may have come to people's notice that we don't have enough water up here for irrigation. One of the reasons is because of people putting in turf grasses, and we're trying to reduce the area of turf grasses. So we're encouraging people to put in native grasses. So if you put in native grasses, you usually want to put in wildflowers among them, either a blue flax or a red poppies or blanket flowers, or there's some yellow coreopsis. There are all sorts of different flowers you can put in. And if you put those flowers in among the grasses, the last thing you want to do is cut it all down to 6 inches, because you'll cut all your wildflowers and they'll never flower. So there's some real problems with this unless you have some sort of language which deals with the question of native versus turf grasses. I've got no problem with you having a thing about turf grasses, but I do think you've got to have an exemption for native naturalized yards and wildflower meadows, which is what a lot of people are trying now to do. The last thing is you have a thing about disposal of cuttings in organized manner. Most of the rest of the country has learned to use mulching lawnmowers, which has had the effect of greatly reducing the flood of green waste going into landfills. And it would be a really good idea if Utah could get on board with this, because it reduces water use, it reduces leachate from landfills, and it's altogether an up and down good thing. So if you can get people to stop bagging their lawn clippings and rather to leave them on the lawn, then that will reduce the water usage and leads to healthier turf, in my personal opinion. Thank you. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Miranda. Charlie, did you want to address those?
Yeah, happy to. Sorry, let me get unmuted there. So yeah, as far as native grasses and wildflowers go, I think that's a great idea. You know, I was trying to contemplate a little bit earlier how to address even things such as sagebrush. You know, because you got a lot of that growing naturally. I don't think that we'd be able. So I do think that we should have something in here that would exempt out, at the very least, native grasses and wildflowers. I don't think that we're going to find a solution today to the storm drain problem. That's not intended to be what we're dealing with in this case. But hopefully we can find a resolution to that soon, and I'll chat with the county engineers about it. As far as where the property line ends or where the right-of-way ends, in most cases, it's not at the back of curb. If there's a sidewalk, it's about a foot beyond the house side of the sidewalk or the back of the sidewalk. But if you were to pull a tape, you know, from the center line of the road, find a survey monument in the center line of the road and pull a tape. In most cases, we're looking at somewhere. Some of the roads are 60 feet 60 feet wide right of way. Some are 66. Just depends on what the subdivision plat says. And if you were to pull that tape, you'd go well beyond the back of that curb. So there's still some area to be maintained, and a lot of folks plant grass right up to the back of that curb. And in some cases, the county required grass or some kind of vegetation up to the back of that curb. As far as cuttings go, being promptly disposed of in an organized manner, I have the same concern that Ms. Menzies did. But as I discussed that a little bit with our code enforcement officer who had suggested the language, she wouldn't consider mulching she wouldn't consider mulching to be disposing of something in an inappropriate manner. That's a pretty organized method. Her issue is cutting it down, you know, the tall grasses and just leaving it out, or piling it up and just letting it sit for potential rat's nest in the future, which is something that does occur, and it's something that she has to enforce on a somewhat frequent basis. And so that was her concern. If we need to reword this a little bit to make it a little bit more clear, more than happy to work on that. I think I hit all the concerns. Anything I missed?
Can I respond, Charlie?
Up to the chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
You've got weeds except noxious or invasive weeds which shall be removed promptly. No problem with that, because that helps our ranchers.
Mm-hmm.
And you say non-ornamental grasses. I would say turf grasses, and just be specific about turf grasses, because the vast majority of the successful plantings up here are a thing called crested wheatgrass. And crested wheatgrass grows naturally to 2.5, 3 feet tall. And that's been one of the most successful ways of revegetating. And you're going to have to get with a landscape architect to find something that grows better up here. I'm not sure I like it, but I'm telling you, that's the only plant that we know, the only grass that we're certain will absolutely take. We've tried fescue, we've tried buffalo grass. You have to be really careful with when you plant it. All of these things have trouble, but the turf grasses, if people are letting a turf grass, bluegrass lawn grow, then feel free to have a go at it.
Great. Thank you. Great suggestions.
I do have one question if the audience, well, we're still in public meeting, sorry.
Yeah, those are great comments. Okay, so anyone else in the audience want to speak to this? Okay, I'll entertain the public hearing. I'll go ahead and make a motion to close the public hearing. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, public hearing is closed. Commissioner Francis?
I just had a question. So this would apply, I assume, to, there are a lot of neighborhoods, at least in the Eden area, that that are not built out and have not been built out for many years. Opikins, even, or they have a lot of open area, common area. So that would still be applicable, wouldn't it? There's a lot of weeds and grasses that are, you know, just growing the pasture. So, and they should, they were approved, for instance, Opikins with deferral for curb and gutter. So would the developer then be responsible to cut the weeds down? I'm thinking of the one this summer that was a problem in the village at Wolf Creek, where it had all the scotch and the weeds were, it was a fire danger. It was a serious fire danger in that small neighborhood because the weeds and the noxious weeds were feet high, several feet high. And the weed committee did get on that and they cleaned that up. But it is a problem in a lot of neighborhoods if they're not cleaning up the weeds.
Yeah, absolutely. The challenge that our ordinance as currently written has is it doesn't get very specific in terms of in what manner you should be manicuring your property. So on the one hand, you've got a great steward of their land who has vegetation that's a little bit longer than 6 inches, but it's great. It looks great in the community. It works well. On the other hand, you've got absentee landowners who don't care. And so finding a way to write an ordinance that only applies to the absentee landowners, there's going to be some subjectivity, and subjectivity is the enemy of good ordinance writing. The way that it's currently written, it basically says if our zoning enforcement officer, I mean, it implies that if our zoning enforcement officer thinks that your yard is unkempt, she can go after you for a zoning violation. But if with this new language put in there, it gives her a little bit more objective standard to hang her hat on. And remember, we are still complaint based. So I don't think she's out there going to be driving around looking for, with her tape measure, for grasses over 6 inches.
Okay, any other comments on these?
Charlie, Commissioner Burton, I think you're making great progress here. If the concept is, if it's ornamental turf grass out there and it's unkempt, that's a problem. If it's natural vegetation, that's what we are in the valley, is natural vegetation and rural.
Yeah.
And then it works. So thanks for making those changes.
Oh, happy to do so. I don't know if it's clear, and I hate to say this out loud, but this was definitely not a passion project of mine, but something that definitely needed to be done. So glad for the help.
Then another problem is when you use the word weeds, because what's a weed? If you use natural vegetation, okay, we can understand that. It's supposed to be there. If it's noxious weeds, we can understand that. But the general term weeds,
too general.
I have the holder.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion on this, and maybe my suggestion is to add to the motion additional language that covers the native grasses and native vegetation, maybe. Anybody want to take a crack at that? For instance, if somebody wanted to recommend, could recommend it as stated and just simply add the language that the commission would like to see staff change or add to the verbiage, the exemption of native grasses and something like that. Charlie, is that clear enough for you?
Absolutely. In my note right over here, if you could see it, I did write a note about exempting out native grasses and wildflowers. I'm going to think about the best way to write that so that we can deal with more than just native grasses and wildflowers, other kinds of native vegetation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like a big deal. Is we could table it till he gets it right, but I'm pretty confident Charlie can get it right.
Yeah. See, native grasses is limited to grasses, but vegetation would include trees and shrubs and sagebrush and all kinds of stuff that grows here. So that probably needs to be expanded.
I just have maybe the confusion on the staff report application request. It is ZTA 2020-07, isn't it? Because it says standard or storage units up.
Oh yeah, I don't know. This didn't get updated. I do have an updated version of this. I apologize. That was a copy and paste.
I probably opened an older one. I apologize. But is that still the file number then?
Yeah, it is the correct file number. It's just incorrect listing.
Well, I'll go ahead and make the motion that is this the legislative motion? Are we just recommending?
Just recommending.
I make a motion that we recommend to the commission that approval of ZTA 2020-07 as recommended by staff, with an addition that they would look at the verbiage regarding native grasses and vegetation. Is that adequate?
Would it be okay if you also mentioned turf grasses instead of non-ornamental grasses as shown here?
Yes, and also to rework the wording on turf grasses versus ornamental grasses.
Would that include just the verbiage that Charlie has drafted here to the right in red?
Motion says that we would leave it into the to planning staff's recommendations for that verbiage.
Okay, do I have a second for that?
Second that.
Okay, discussion.
Did we read the motion as seconded? I think there was some confusion in there and I'm trying to understand.
All right, that wasn't clear as mud. Was that caught? Does she have the verbiage written down?
So maybe just restate it one more time.
Do I have a motion to
sentence
forward a
plus-
positive recommendation as stated in the staff report, including the verbiage of native grasses and vegetation and turf grasses versus ornamental grasses?
Okay. Any more discussion on that?
Yeah, question, Commissioner Francis, did you intend that language about where there's curbing or a deferral agreement in place, then it applies, otherwise it doesn't? Was that intended to be a part of your motion?
Yes, that's the staff recommendations, and I'm going with that.
Okay, I only question because the staff recommendation doesn't include that. That was just kind of added in there to the screen.
Well, then that's my confusion.
It is my recommendation that you include that. It wasn't in the report because the report was written before the Western Weaver Planning Commission asked that it be put in there. So maybe I shouldn't take credit for it. The Western Weaver Planning Commission has asked that it be in there.
So do I need to add that then in my recommendation, or is it in the latest version?
It is in the latest version, just as you're seeing it here on the screen. It is saved as the Western Weaver Planning Commission's recommendation.
Okay. So do I need to amend my motion or not then?
I would probably amend it just for clarity's sake.
Okay. I will amend my motion. Do I have to restate it with the amendment? To add that it also includes staff recommendations and recommendations from the West Weber Commission, that it only apply to areas that have curb and gutter or have a deferral for curb and gutter.
Okay, does that work for everybody? Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Any
Commissioner
other,
Bird.
okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Whew. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and go to the work session items. We have a Eden Small Area Plan discussion and map review by Charlie. Charlie, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Thank you. I'm getting these items pulled up. As I'm getting my items pulled up, I've actually, Steve Bird and I have been working on Old Town Eden for the better part of a year. I think you guys have seen some of the beginning proposals regarding that. The storage unit conversation that we had with the rezone recently over by the junior high school kind of kicked off a more intense conversation, I think, at the county commission level about the need to expedite both Old Town Eden and New Town Eden before we get additional proposals that are going to essentially undermine the future of village centers in these areas. And so I've asked Steve to represent the ideas that emerged when working with the committee that from the Old Town Eden area, which we selected people, both business owners and property owners in that area, to participate. So he's going to recap the presentation and kind of show with some visuals what these, I'm just going to call them main streets or small main streets, maybe Main Street Light, could look like in time. What we're going to show you in this presentation is not intended to be what's going to happen tomorrow or even next year. I doubt it'll even happen 10 years from now. It's going to have to be bitten off in chunks, and I'm anticipating, in fact, all of the maps that I'm showing, or I'll be showing you guys, show 30-year build out. So this is intended to be in time and over time. It's intended to be used by implementation or to evolve by implementation of transferable development rights. So as you look at the maps and you look at the areas where we as staff are thinking maybe this area shouldn't be overdeveloped, those are the areas where development rights that exist could be sold and moved into these village areas. We do know that commercial operations, in order to have a village center, commercial operations do not function well if you don't have rooftops. You've got very few communities in the United States that can survive all 4 seasons business-wise without being in an area that where it doesn't snow. And so these communities, they've got to be able to not just thrive through summertime when you've got the water and other outdoor recreation opportunities going on, not just survive wintertime when you've got all these visitors from all over the world visiting the 3 ski resorts we have. They've got to be able to get through the shoulder seasons of spring and fall, and that's just not going to happen if you don't have people living near these businesses. And so you'll see that we do believe that we are hitting the nail on the head with the intent of the general plan, moving clusters of people or congregations of people into a smaller footprint around these village nodes or these village areas, and leaving the rest of the land hopefully relatively undeveloped and untouched. And what that does is it gives even those who live in the village, who might be a little bit closer to their neighbors than those who are on a 3-acre parcel outside of the village, a sense of openness, because all they got to do is step outside of that village and enjoy, see and enjoy the open spaces that were not developed because the village was created. We're contemplating a growth boundary. So you can see kind of where the development stops and where the natural area is allowed to be. I say natural area, that includes farmland, that includes wildlife habitat, it includes grazeland, just the open spaces where development is not occurring. And so I kind of give that little introduction and caveat, so it's very clear when you see the maps, you understand that this is at least 3 decades in the making. Steve's presentation will show you a potential phasing plan for the Old Town Eden just right around the park. I think it's the 5-year, the 10-year, and the 30-year phasing plan. And that's kind of a general idea of how that area can grow. The bigger maps I'll show you is not the phasing plan, it's the 30-year build out. And then we have to kind of back our way in to figure out exactly how we want to phase this. Which streets do we want to see develop first? How are they going to develop? How are they going to be funded? Who's going to be building the streets in a way that can support and sustain the tourism-oriented retail, as well as the local service commercial, as well as whatever households or housing units might be located in that area. So Steve, you want to, I'll stop sharing, you want to take it away, and I'll get everything else set up and prepared.
Great. Hi, commissioners. So Charlie mentioned briefly, it was just talking about the meetings that we've had and the plans that have been discussed. I'll just mention, so this all occurred about 2 years ago. It was fall of 2018 when we started meeting with what we call the Old Town Eden Steering Committee. Charlie and I reached out to a number of business owners and homeowners in this area, in the Eden area, including Chris Hogue, who's on the Planning Commission, and we wanted to understand what these people wanted for Eden, specifically for the Old Town Eden area, and we wanted to know if they wanted what the general plan says this area should have, which is a village area, kind of pedestrian-friendly, walkable village area. As you all know, planners, we have, while we have good ideas, they don't really come to fruition unless it's something that the people want. And so that's what we wanted to know in this case. So we met with the steering committee multiple times, just there and actually at the Eden Park Bowery, to understand what they wanted. One of the things that we did that was actually really cool is we walked the area with them. It was before it got too cold, so we were able to walk around the Eden Square, and just I guess maybe realize how what could be better, I guess, is why we wanted to walk around. As you know, as I look south here at 5500 East, there is kind of a pathway that runs, north and south, and that's about really all we have at this point. If you've ever driven through this intersection like I have, you pretty much come to a stop because you don't want to get hit by someone else going the other way. So we wanted to walk the area, and the first meeting we had, I would say it went pretty well. We had a group of 10 to 15 people show up. We made sure to send out notice in the paper and on the county's Facebook page to let anybody who wanted to show up, they could be there. So we had a pretty good turnout. What we talked about that first time was we showed a couple pictures of some resort towns. So I think we showed some images from Jackson Hole, some from Colorado, Montana, some from Ketchum, Idaho, and we heard from these folks in the steering committee that yes, they did want to implement some kind of regulation that made Old Town Eden pedestrian friendly and made it a place where people could actually feel safe walking outside, walking around to different businesses, walking over to the park. And so what we did is the next time we met a few months later, we came up, Charlie actually is really good at Photoshop. And so what he did is he took images. You'll see here, we've got 5500 East and 5500 East and 2200 South. What it looks like today without any kind of improvements. And I will say, we did run through this presentation, I think it was the beginning of 2019, with the Planning Commission. I know that there are 3 or 4 new Planning Commission members, and so this is probably all new, but we did run through this at that time, and nothing has changed on this presentation since then. We, like Charlie said, it is something that we do want to move forward. It does have to happen slowly, but I just wanted to let you know that the Planning Commission has seen this before. I think we really just want to remind you of what we're working on here. So let me run you through a couple of these slides that Charlie created. So first of all, obviously this is what a road would look like if it were, nicer, paved, new. And I will say this is planned to be 100-foot right of way. So this is just imagine 100 feet total is the right of way width that we're fitting all these improvements on. I'm going to go through a couple of these. One of the things that we talked about with the steering committee was ways to slow down cars, slow down vehicular traffic so that it's safer for pedestrians and cyclists or anybody that might be walking. We talked about this idea of these bulb outs, and also we talked about like the raised median, some kind of a median. And basically what happens is when you're driving, you see things that are closer to you and you slow down. That's the intent behind it. And also it looks really nice. So you're getting some actual, pathway, some sidewalk on both sides of the road there. Let's see here. Just a couple ideas that came up in the steering committee was, some kind of a water feature there on the east side, or I guess the east side of this road, or the west side of the park, possibly some kind of a bridge or something like that. You've got some sidewalk. You've got wider sidewalk, places where people can actually walk and gather over here on the west side of the road there. There's what it would look like with some people. We talked about angled parking, 45-degree angled parking along here, so that people could I guess, get in and get out faster. I think ultimately we decided on angled parking because that's really what fit within the 100-foot wide right of way. You see green here, that's for cyclists. We would love to have that on both sides of the road and have it separated from both the cars and people actually walking. That's going to be, I think that's planned to be around 5 or 6 feet wide, the bike paths. Different color also to just indicate the difference. Here's what it looks like with more cars. You've got some lighting that meets the county's dark sky ordinance. Trees are another big thing that we talked about with the steering committee that we discussed was trees make the pedestrians feel safer. It also makes the area look prettier. We talked about adding, you've seen in certain main streets, you've seen, flowers on street lights. You've got benches, you've got places to park your bikes, you've got even places to eat outside possibly when the weather's good. And then I can show you this next one, but this is just looking on 2200 East. It's essentially the same thing. We wanted to take this back. Again, this was at the second meeting we had, and the steering committee gave us a thumbs up. They said, yes, this is what we want. They also understand that this is, while it is technically more rules that apply to them, they understand that it makes the area more cohesive. It's going to be more attractive in the long run than just letting the existing zoning that we call Euclidean zoning. You can put your building back as far as you want under the existing zoning. And if all buildings are right up next to each other, well, it just feels certainly more of a downtown area. So I'll run through this really quick, just to show you what this other 2200 would look like. But also, again, we're looking at 100-foot wide right of way. It may need to be a little bit wider than that, but we feel like we could generally fit most of these improvements within that. Now, as you know, currently we don't have any regulations that we do have a complete street regulation, and you have to have your building look a certain way, but nothing that makes it look. The general plan talks about the general store, and it talks about the blacksmith shop. Maybe having the future buildings look more like that. We don't have any regulations that require that right now. It's really just, it's just planners really just trying to, I wouldn't say negotiate, but we've had a few people, we actually have an application in right now, and luckily for this area, and luckily the owner has been really good to work with, and he is planning on making his building fit in with this future plan because he understands how important it is to this area. So that's essentially my presentation. I don't know if you guys have any specific questions for me at this point. Sounds like
This Commissioner Burton, I just got one question.
Mm-hmm.
So what governmental regulations required the blacksmith shop, all the buildings around there, the farm, the barn that's just been restored, what required him to do that? Or did he just do it on his own?
So I may not know all the information behind this, but it's my understanding that there was a rezone and a development agreement that was proposed, and that we were able to implement some kind of design standards specifically for the blacksmith shop. And so that's what I would say is it was a development agreement. Certainly he didn't have to make it look as nice as he did. I would say that just comes from him wanting it to look like a really nice building and to make the area look really nice.
Okay, so really nice things like that can happen without being imposed by ordinances.
True. Let me show you something that happened that I would say that it is pretty nice. It doesn't quite get what the general plan calls for. This was at the same time, we had Maverick come in 2 years ago and redo their new building. And we did have conversations with them, and we said, this is planned to be a village area. We gave them some really good ideas about what they could do, how they could bring their building up towards the front and still be able to do what they needed to do as far as being a gas station. And they said, thank you, but we don't have to do that, and we're not going to. So you're right, Commissioner Burton. In very rare cases, we do get really nice looking buildings that do meet the intent of the general plan. But when we don't have very specific rules for a kind of a small area, they obviously don't have to do that if they don't want to.
Okay, so I guess I misunderstand. Where is Old Town Eden? Where is this area you're talking about? Does it extend over there to the grocery store, the Maverick?
So Maverick is Newtown. That's also planned to be a village area. But the Old Town Eden, you're looking really about a 1/4 mile radius around the park.
Okay, that's what I thought. So Maverick is a different animal, different area.
It is, but I just bring that up to point out that it is a village area, and we would like to have implement design standards that would prohibit Maverick from doing that again in the future.
Okay.
It's not pedestrian friendly.
Okay. Now, when I see these photos again, I think of Center Street in Provo, which is a walking area. It's also a freeway exit. It's a disaster. There's no way to get through there. The traffic is calm because there's such congestion with angle parking, restricted lanes. It's so this is a bottleneck. If you're going from Eden to Huntsville, this is the only way you can get there. Does staff have some ideas on how to have big roads carrying lots of traffic get around this area? So this can be walking and traffic can be somewhere else?
You know, I don't know that was something that we really focused on as we talked about this. We were really looking at what the general plan says for these areas. And it does talk about this walkable community, this walkable village area. And you know, maybe we need to relook at what the people really want in this community. But that is what we heard from them is, yes, we do want to implement these standards, and we want the government regulation to be the tool that forces everybody else to come into compliance. I almost think of it as just kind of an HOA saying, yeah, we want all these buildings to look really nice, but because we realize that not everybody is going to make their buildings look this nice.
Yeah, it seems to me a major concern is transportation, because a nice walkable area, that people may choose to do that. But somehow the more development happens in the valley, the more need for transportation exists. It just does. And this is the bottleneck.
Yeah.
And then also, I guess what we're boiling down to is this a top-down design, or is this something that landowners choose as part of the community to do? You know, if it's rural, it seems consistent with rural means the landowners figure out what they're going to do. If it's something else, a planned community, then the planners decide what it's going to look like. So that's some ideas that I'm trying to reconcile here.
Charlie, John Howell, you know, you have to have design standards, because if you don't, people are going to put in whatever they want. Up in Park City, in the old Central Park City, somebody put in a modern building right in the middle of it, and that should never happen, you know. And you know, maybe there could be some sort of a belt or something planned to go around this if you wanted to for through traffic.
I like the way you think, Jack, and also Jeff, because both of you have hit the nail on the head in different respects. Steve, are you good if I take over, or do you have more you want to go over?
You're gonna have to take this presentation from my cold dead hands, Charlie.
I think we need to adjourn the meeting. I've got some presentation to take. Okay, well, I want to go, by the end of this conversation, I want to go back to the graphics that Steve was showing, but I want to show them to you in a different way, because I've got into a modeling program, and that doesn't mean that I'm posing for the camera. It means I'm trying to model what this could look like. It's easy to take Photoshop and make anything look awesome, but when you have to actually put measurements to paper, it's a different story. So I've started modeling how these streets can look. But before we do so, we want to talk a little bit more right up along the lines of thinking that Commissioner Burton was on. By what tool does this get executed? Now, to echo what Commissioner Howell said, Park City isn't the only city that has a modern well, it's not modern anymore. I guess it was built in the 80s or 90s, but it does have a distinctly different style from any of the other buildings that are around it. And as you go there, it's very noticeable, and it's really easy for someone to go, oh, that doesn't belong there. Park City is not the only town. In fact, you've got a lot of towns who were late to the game on adopting good design standards for the public realm. We're not talking about on the private side. Private side is behind the public realm, and I'll show you exactly what I mean by public realm when I show you the models that I've been trying to mock up here. But we will have missed opportunities if we don't have design standards for the public realm, and this is for the good of the public. One of the tools that we're contemplating, and we'll probably try and encourage you guys to adopt, is design standards through form-based code. A form-based code is it's heavily focused on form as opposed to use. Now, it doesn't mean that we still wouldn't regulate uses like we do now, and say we don't want, certain kinds of uses. Maybe we don't want to have an alcohol establishment right next to a preschool, or something to that effect. And so we still can get in there and be a little more specific on how those uses can be organized within the community, but the primary focus is on how it looks. Now, we're not in here designing buildings. Instead, we're in here designing the public streetscape. The buildings that front the public right-of-way, first off, they need to front. You need to hold that streetscape. You need to have defining lines between what is public and what is private. The building facades themselves, we would put in a range of standards. We wouldn't say you could do this, 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 or this. We would say, here's the architectural era that we're shooting for, which we did chat with the designers of the blacksmith shop, the architects, and we asked them what area we should be shooting for to get that same flavor, at least in the Old Town Eden area. Now, the flavor of architecture in the Old Town Eden area might not be the flavor of architecture in at the four-way intersection, unless that's what the community wants. If you look in the general plan, the community said that we want to have some kind of an agrarian design, so something focused on enhancing or accentuating our agrarian lifestyle. We want to have Old West Mine Town design, and we want to have mountain rustic design. Old Town Eden, we already know, has kind of gone towards the Old West Mine Town architectural field just by what's there. I mean, you got the blacksmith shop, and you have the Carlos and Harley's, the general store over there. And if we were to focus on the era in which those buildings were produced, I think we'll get probably the best outcome, without saying this is the size, this is the dimension, and this is exactly how you're going to design that building. Good building design has, at the very least, three components. It has a base, it has a body, and it has a cap. If you have a decent base that's designed a specific way, the body of a building and a cap on the building, the cap would be whatever ornate element goes up on top, or maybe it's a parapet wall. Maybe in some cases it can be a gable. Your body is going to be, well, your base is going to be essentially, it can be your whole first story, or it could be just a wainscot along the bottom of the first story. Especially if you only have a single story. It could be the top of the base could be defined by canopies, shop canopies that project out into the right of way. And then the body above that can be a bank of windows with columns in between. Again, these are not specific regulations that we would impose, but ideas on good architectural design as established by architects and designers. What happens behind that wall? I feel that the community should adopt regulations that lighten up the expectation to regulate what's going on behind the wall. I do think that in order to have a vibrant, walkable pedestrian community, you have to have things of interest for pedestrians to see on that ground level. And so retail and commercial space on that ground level that will generate attention and attract people to that area, as opposed to having just a blank wall for a long linear distance, is going to create that vibrant sense of place, that attraction that makes people want to be there. But beyond that, behind that, or above that, let it be storage units, like we were just talking about. Let it be a dentist's office. Let it be housing. Let it be a whole host of things, up to the landowner or the building owner's choosing. And so this does kind of two things. It adopts standards that would compel owners to design within a threshold, not very specific, but it would be within a threshold. But it relaxes the use requirements. Now, obviously, if you've got a bar or a dance hall right next to residential units, we're going to want to see some kind of method of noise dampening. And that is not hard to do. You get these loud concert venues that you could barely hear from the street, with good insulation and good noise dampening applied to that particular concert venue's exterior walls, to the point that residences in the area can't hear it. And so we would look at performance. So you'd need to, if you're going to be doing things inside of your unit that are going to affect people outside the unit, noise, smell, sights, sounds, oh, that's part of noise, vibrations, electromagnetic pulses, whatever it may be that's going to affect someone negatively, affect their ability for quiet enjoyment of the place where they reside or the place of business that they have. You would need to, as the person who's affecting them, mitigate that. Just the same way we deal with conditional use permits. Okay, so that said, framing that public right-of-way is going to be, it's really important. Any great village you've gone to, I'm going to use the word downtown. I hope nobody in this meeting takes downtown to mean downtown Salt Lake or even downtown Ogden. This is downtown Ogden, very, very light. We've got probably more than 3 decades to go before we're even close to a downtown Ogden. But it is kind of that downtown Main Street feel that you see as you're driving through rural anywhere. You come upon a community node. It can be small. You can pass through it within a matter of seconds, or for some of the really small downtown areas. Or it could be, a little bit longer and a little bit more stretched out along the highway. But the important part is that it provides something where people want to be. and is designed in a way to encourage that. Okay, so forgive me while I get this open. So I'm working in a couple of different software programs, and unfortunately, the government issued computer I have doesn't do great with heavy intensity graphics, but we'll be working on that soon. And so I had to export these to PDFs, but let's get that where you could see it. One of the concerns that I have, and something that I've learned in working with the public of the Ogden Valley, is that any kind of colors on a map can easily be misinterpreted as change. And so I want to talk about the colors on these maps. But before I do so, I want to make it clear. Forgive me here. Okay. In form-based codes, the primary focus is on the street, and given that focus, sorry, so you can see how slow this, I'm trying to zoom out and it's kind of clunky. The tool to regulate would be a street regulating plan. So the map you see over here, can you guys see this okay? Whoa.
I don't see any visual.
No visual. Okay, hang on. How about now?
Yay.
Okay.
That's great.
Good. So the map on the left that you see, sorry, I'm trying to get to the point where I could see you guys and the map. This kind of gives the Euclidean zoning perspective. We currently are governed by Euclidean zoning. Euclidean zoning, essentially, it harkens back to, I think it's 1914 or something like that, Village of Euclid versus Ambler Realty, where it's basically the first Supreme Court case that said, yeah, zoning is something that is within the police power of a community for the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And as a result from that, you had a bunch of communities rushing to create zoning maps that took land areas and put a polygon around them and said, this is this zone, this is that zone, and here are the requirements in this zone and that zone. With this, you've got things like minimum setback requirements, you've got minimum design requirements, height requirements, but the by large focus is the uses. Is something allowed or is it not allowed? A regulating plan, a street regulating plan through form-based zoning takes the street, not the area. And
Charlie, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just see your
desktop.
Yeah.
Screen.
Your Euclidean zoning map, we didn't see it.
Oh my goodness. Okay, hang on a second.
So you may want to go back to that.
Can you see that?
There we go.
There we go.
I'm sorry. I've got about 97% of the RAM in this computer operating, so it's going to run kind of clunky. Okay. So this is the Euclidean zoning map here. If you were to look at what we have on GeoGizmo, you'll see Euclidean zoning, just polygons with shades of color, and those shades of color and the polygons, they represent a zone. And inside of that zone, you've got uses that are either not allowed, they are allowed, or they're allowed with specific conditions that you can apply to them. Form-based, come on. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. There we go. I hope. Okay. Form-based focuses on the streets. So let me get in here a little bit closer. So as you can see here, now I do have some lighter colors that kind of denote maybe potential building outlines. That's just for illustrative purposes. The streets and the color of these streets are what could become part of a street regulating plan. So instead of looking at your lot and saying your entire lot is colored AV3 zone, therefore all of these standards apply to you, instead we look at the street and say your lot fronts on this red street, and the red street needs to be designed in these specific ways. And we have a street cross section, and we have a minimum building architectural standard. Essentially, that's the easiest, most condensed way to explain that. Okay. Here on this map, the red would be essentially mixed use commercial with the possibility for residential, either on top or behind that street level commercial. We know that the general plan says no new density. Do not adopt any regulations that will create new density. Deal with what the current zone gives us. And so we know that we've got areas within the valley where we should transfer density from, and then we have areas in the valley where we should transfer density to, and that's where we would see the increase in residential units in these mixed-use village areas. On the internal blocks of these mixed-use village areas, you might see a little bit of high density. You might see some apartments, you might see some condos or some townhomes. Again, this is long-term. There is a private market that we have to be respectful of. And that private market is not going to flood the area with high density residential, especially if there isn't commercial services to serve them. And so, you know, there is going to be natural market driven limitations on how this evolves. As you look at the street regulating plan and as it expands outward, it kind of moves from mixed use to a little bit more higher density residential. And then you kind of get these bands of kind of radiating bands coming out from the center of this public park, this public space, radiating outwards to lesser and lesser densities. And again, none of these would be new densities. They would be densities that are moved from lands that we want to keep from being developed into this area here, okay? So this would be maybe small to medium lot residential development. This would be maybe what Ogden City considers the 5 or 6,000 square foot lot size over in here. And then you run outwards one more band and you get the larger lot sizes. And then you run one more kind of limit outwards and you get basically status quo. This is the 1 to 3 acre parcels. Okay, so as I looked at the existing development in the area, you've got a subdivision in here. You've got a road that kind of comes up and wraps around and comes down, and you've got houses in here that are almost at the density that you'll see in these areas here. And so if you need a visualization of what some of this looks like, go through this subdivision. That's essentially what it is. But what this does is it sets a definition of where development occurs or should occur versus where it should not occur. And it puts a limitation essentially to preserve open spaces for the rest of the valley. And I'm not suggesting that all of the density in the Ogden Valley, on the Ogden Valley floor, move into these areas here. I'm running the calculations, you'll see them coming shortly, on what it would be to just move the densities on what you see within this picture frame, just within the Eden area into these areas. How many units would we need to plan in order to transfer, for example, and this isn't something that is necessarily proposed as a realistic outcome, but just an illustration for the talking point. If we were to take every density point that was out in these open lands and move them in here or in here, what would that take? What would that do? How many would that result in? And would that turn into too dense for the folks who live there to pallet? Again, over the next 30 years. The alternative to this, just to remind anyone who is in the meeting, who may not recall the general planning process, the alternative to this is do nothing and allow one house every 3 acres across the valley floor. And if that's the more desired outcome, then that's the direction we should go. But that's not what the general plan, and that's not what the public has essentially asked of us on this. Okay. So this is a street regulating plan, essentially. When you look at all these green areas, I did color them green, green polygons, again, for illustration purposes. But these would be areas that could potentially be held as public open land. So when we're looking at these wide areas, undeveloped wide areas, that's all going to be private space, even if we transfer density from those landowners, which the transfer, just in case anyone's curious, it would result in making them financially whole so that they're not losing land value because of a transfer into these areas. And I could, as we go through this process, we'll explain by what mechanism we can do that. But these areas here could potentially be public open space where you've got trails that run along the Riverwalk, trails that connect this New Eden area or the four-way intersection over to Old Town Eden. Old Town Eden being the potential Old West mine look, and New Town Eden being more potentially agrarian look and feel. And then you've got all of these waterways. They're just ditches, and they're private ditches, and we'd have to work with the ditch companies, not against them, and definitely not without them, to potentially create pedestrian trails that can run through these areas along these waterways. If you guys recall from the USU students presentation, which showed a ton of density all over in this area, which, by the way, is not what we're suggesting. This is far less than what they were proposing. They were proposing something that it seemed like the community kind of liked. They liked the idea of using this canalway as pedestrian accessibility between the two villages. As you come into, so this is Highway 158, this green line here. As you come into this area here where you have the opportunity to turn off to Old Town Eden or go into the Eden four-way intersection, you would come to your first roundabout. That roundabout would create an ease of traffic movement into Old Town Eden for those who would want to go there. Make it a little bit more inviting to potentially go in that direction. And then obviously to help transport people more to the north. The existing Pineview Loop pathway would be interconnected with all these other pathways that potentially run through these green spaces. These green spaces could also be used as potential city parks when the area decides to incorporate. It's only a matter of enough of a tax base for the city to choose to incorporate, or for this area to choose to incorporate. And you could have a municipal building. You could have a park complex. You can have over here on the lowest part of the valley that isn't on Forest Service land, you could potentially have a packaged sewer treatment plant. And just so everyone knows, when we're talking about packaged sewer treatment plant, that's completely indoors. There's no smells, there's no ponds, there's nothing on the outside, it's all inside. This color here is intended to be government or public uses. So maybe you've got a high school, maybe you've got city services, maybe you've got an intermodal hub where you've got the ski buses. Hopefully, if you get a little bit more of a commercial area in here, they won't just be temporary ski buses for wintertime. They'll be transporting people year round, where they can drop people off at maybe a parking structure. Or a public parking facility where their vehicles are, or to the trail system to navigate into these other community areas. And then you get into where the Eden four-way is. We've heard from the public that Eden four-way intersection, there is zero desire for traffic lights. In fact, most of the public that we've heard from, they would rather die than see a traffic light in the valley. And if we're successful, that will happen. And what I mean by that is you won't see a traffic light until people have moved on in life, or death, as the case may be. So as you come into this intersection here, because it's a traffic circle, traffic circles aren't really great with pedestrians, but they're great for cars. So this would be kind of a more vehicle-oriented commercial space. Let me get zoomed in here. This building right here is the Valley Market. Now it's a little bit bigger. I think I put a little bit more to the footprint, but I'll show you the existing buildings in just a moment and compare them to the polygons that I show here as buildings. But just for size perspective, this is about the size of the current Valley Market. We do know that the property over here is owned by the owners of the Valley Market, and as the need for expansion occurs, they'd probably rather put their facility, their grocery store over here, and sell that as a different type of store. But just so you can kind of determine the scale, that's a pretty small grocery store in terms of grocery stores. This one here is still a modest grocery store. It's still not even the size of, for example, a typical size Smith's that you would see in Ogden. And so that's the kind of scale you're looking at. So these facilities in here along the purple lines, you'd see, that's where you'd see your drive-through restaurant, your quick bite to eat, your got to drive there, stop at the, I don't know, the All Dollar or whatever it is, just real quick in and out. The general plan says no big box retail. And so we would stick to what the general plan says, less than a certain amount of square feet. But give the opportunity for street or vehicle-oriented commercial. Another way to look at vehicle-oriented commercial is also using the word regional commercial, which essentially would serve the entire valley. And it would act as a draw for others in the valley to come in. And then we're back to over here, kind of mixed use commercial, where this is more of the Main Street feel. So this is currently Valley Junction Drive, I believe. I think it ends right about here right now. And right here on the corner is the new Golden West Credit Union with the stub that they put in. We would just connect that through. For vehicles, they'd be able to route right through the vehicle-oriented commercial, right around that quick roundabout and right back on up towards the ski resort or to Wolf Creek. It'd be a quick in and out, no need to stop. For others who are interested in being here, for staying here, they would take a quick left here or come around the roundabout and come up in here. And this is where their kind of Main Street feel would be. Okay, so this is where we would frame that. Over here, we would still want to see buildings brought to the street frontage with parking on the internal of these blocks. because those buildings will frame that street, but they don't have to be right on the right of way line. They can have a certain setback with green buffers and pathways that route around and through them, and drive-through restaurant, lanes and all that. Whereas over here, we would expect those buildings to be brought up to the hardscape, up to the sidewalk, and be more focused on being there for the pedestrian experience. So someone who wants to visit the area would come, they would park their car in some kind of a parking complex, or they would take a risk like you do in a more urbanized area, village area, and park in one of the small parking lots that are behind the commercial spaces. And then patronize those businesses, okay? And then as you look outward, this dark green out here, that would be us encouraging people who are in the 3-acre zones to sell their whatever density they potentially have, so that we would try and encourage transfers from these dark green areas into these kind of lighter areas, or preferably the red areas. The more we can put in the red and the orange, the less you're going to see density sprawling out from the center. Okay, so just to kind of recap for everyone, the darker green would be less dense than the AB3 zone. The lighter green here would be pretty much status quo. You're going to be anywhere from 1 to 3 acres in there. This development over here, I'm sure most people are aware of it. What you see over there is essentially what will be there. It is the density that it will result in. We would consider that built out. Okay, so when you're trying to conceptualize how many more homes is this, just drive through that neighborhood and see what that green area is. And then inside of the yellow and the darker yellow and the orange and the red is where we would try and really concentrate that difference. Okay. So, sorry, bear with me as I try and get in here. So I've got a couple of different ways to conceptualize this, but first I want to just show you just from a very simple attempt at 3-dimensionality, if that's a word. This is what you have today. If I forgot your house, I'm sorry. I just drew the houses essentially from the parcel layer as it is now. But these are the buildings that you see today. You got the park right over in here. You got the Park Bowery. You've got the junior high school. You've got the elementary school. You've got a church facility here, a church facility over in here. You've got a trailhead right here. And I actually never knew you had a trailhead right there. At the very least, you've got angular access right there, okay? If we implement these area plans, and again, you've got not a whole lot of development out here on the outsides, okay? If we implement this type of an area plan, or some version of it, it would be a little closer to this over here. Okay, so this is without all the intense colors or anything like that. You can kind of see on a scale how this would work. Now, these dots over here, these aren't exact to what buildings are out there right now, but they do scale to the buildings that are out there. Okay, I just took the footprint from the assessor's office and applied it. Okay, and again, I feel like I need to say it a lot because the issue of density was on the front of everyone's minds when we were doing the general plan. This is not intended to create new density. It is intended to take it from the areas that are best for open space and move it into an area that's compact so it doesn't overrun the entire valley floor. Okay. And then just one other way to kind of conceptualize that, if I can get to it, This is transportation. So you can see the new transportation streets that would be needed. So the dark or the solid lines are existing streets, and the dashed lines are streets that could occur. Now, if you see a dash line going through your house, actually you won't, because I tried very hard to avoid houses and to organize these lines in a way where we aren't taking homes in the future. But you will see that there are dash lines going through potential properties that you may own. This isn't a matter of the county coming in and saying, all right, your property is a road now, sorry. That's not what we're looking at here. What we're looking at here is when you choose to develop your property, if you are in one of these areas and you see how much more land value you could have if you go in this direction, you'll want to go that way if you're looking for the land value. And then you'd come to the county and say, hey, I want to develop this, and we'd say, all right, we're kind of hoping we'd put a road somewhere right in this area. Can you help us out with that? And so that's how these roads are not intended to be survey level accurate. They may be in a completely different configuration, but this kind of gives you the idea. Okay. And I'll put all of this up on our Frontier website and shoot a link out to you guys. And you guys can feel free to share that wide and far. I just wanted to make sure that we explained this and kind of held your hand through it so that it didn't scare anyone. Okay, so let's have a look. First off, let's take just a really quick look at, well, let's go to the modeling software that we're dealing with here. Okay, so this is a little bit wider than the 100-foot wide right-of-way that Steve was talking about. If we were over at the intersection by the park, instead of having this wall of buildings, you would see a park over here with a canal that runs by it that's daylighted or something to that effect, a water feature. So what you see here is essentially, I think it's close to 110-foot wide right-of-way, and over by the park we have about 100 feet. So we needed a little bit more right-of-way from the adjacent landowners. Again, with the buildings, we'd be looking at base body cap and some very rudimentary architectural stylings that would harken back to the time frame we're looking at is probably right around 1880 to 1910 time frame. And again, that's everything on this is up to discussion and change. Okay, so the public realm is this square right here in a three-dimensional space. So it's this square, and then as it goes all the way down. This is the public realm, and this is the area where a street regulating plan is intended to primarily focus its regulation. Again, it wouldn't be necessarily behind the wall, with the exception of what kind of uses happen at the street. 45-degree angle parking, you get the most amount of parking out of your street right-of-way. So we know that if we don't have a sea of asphalt out in front of our store, we're a little bit concerned that nobody's going to think there's anything happening in our store, and so they'll just drive right on by, right? At least that's what a lot of business owners tell us. And so if we hide all the parking in the back, they're not going to know something's happening. It's good to have cars out here. It's good to have people on the streets, just to accentuate that this is a place that you could stop and buy a burger or get an ice cream or buy some jewelry or some flowers or whatever it is that you choose to do from a retail perspective. This version, and this isn't to say that this is going to be the final version by any means, but this version shows a grade separated bikeway. So we know over in the Old Town Eden area, we've got a trail that is on one side of the road. If you put this kind of streetscape out there, you're going to be covering that trail. Now, you got really wide sidewalks, and that's great. But if you are successful in your retail businesses here, those sidewalks are going to be used for street dining. They're going to be used for socializing, hopefully, once COVID ends. They're going to be used for a whole host of things that isn't going to be quite as efficient for a cyclist to ride through. And you don't want a cyclist to try and navigate people. And so when you're in this area, you could see that stepping off of the, stepping off of the sidewalk here and kind of down into a bikeway. That is, then you would step up onto a little concrete median and then over to the parking. It's separated. It's safe from where the vehicles are. The pedestrians are safe from where the cyclists may be. There'd still be an expectations that cyclists go at a reasonable speed though. And it brings those cyclists close to where the vehicles would be at critical junctures, at intersections, so that whoever's driving the car can see that cyclist, that they are going to try and cross the road before the car turns right or left. Okay. Another option, if we can't get the larger right of way, would be to paint sharrows down the road and allow the pathway over here for the pedestrians to end in these sidewalks and for the cyclists to end in the street, and essentially paint these sharrows right on the street and allow the cyclists to share with the cars. Okay, so getting to the question of pinch point that Commissioner Burton brought up. Yeah, this is going to cause a pinch point, but not forever. And we'd be lucky if it causes a little bit of a pinch point. If you can get the speed for the few blocks that are here, in fact, I believe if you pull up this map over here, we're talking about 1-2 blocks essentially, where you'd need the speed to be down at around 25 miles an hour. You're going to get slow enough travelers that they can see what's happening in those storefronts. That is where you're going to get your business. That is where, because this is going to be tourism oriented, you're not necessarily going to have people who automatically know you're there, your business is there. And so showing them that, I mean, your storefront is basically a gigantic billboard for someone who's traveling by, but they're never going to see it at 55 miles an hour. So the question that I think I would ask back about that pinch point is it worth it to create the economy of a village area? It is. The answer to the question, as we find with many different jurisdictions, is it is to a point. It's not when it's the downtown Provo area where you don't have a lot of options to go around. Even though in Provo you can go out and get on First South or First North, those streets are not designed to carry vehicles very fast. Logan, they tried to come up with an alternative. First off, they widened the road, but they can only widen it so much. And so it's 2 lanes in either direction. And then they built, 1,000 West, which is essentially the community bypass. The principle of attracting attention, it only works. So let me see how to phrase that. It is essential to get your community area established and establish a sense of vibrancy and a sense of place and a sense of permanence. Once you've done that, you need to have an alternative for the traffic that do not want to come down here. The people who, once it's established, the people who want to be coming down here, they're going to automatically go down there anyway. If you're in Logan and you want to go to the Bluebird Cafe, you're going on Main Street. But if you're trying to pass through Logan, if you're coming down the street, you're going to want to find an alternative. And so that's why in this potential setting, we looked at, gosh, I got to zoom in again. We looked at 2 streets, 2 main streets potentially. Now, that may cause 2 choke points, but at least it gets a little bit more traffic through the system faster. If that's not good, if that's not good enough, the transportation consultants who did our transportation master plan that didn't get adopted, it failed to get adopted with the general plan, suggested we look at, maybe like what Logan did with a 1,000 West or whatever it is to kind of bypass the area. But expanding it with multiple streets and the potential for multiple streets is going to, I think, unless this really explodes into a really happening place, I think it's going to last at least that 30-year build out. And then from there is the potential. Now this landowner did talk to us and they and said, we don't really want to show more grid streets over here through our land. We would like to in the future just be agricultural and be able to have an agritourism operation. And so we sat down with them and we said, good, in that case, keep it agriculture, keep it successful if you can, and we'll never be talking about building roads over here. At some point in time, he's probably going to want to sell, just like every other agricultural user who ends up dividing up the land and giving it to the kids or whatever. And at that point, there could be potential for another street that kind of connects through it in this area here. Okay, so the pinch point isn't permanent. It is only permanent to establish a prominence for that community.
Charlie?
Yeah.
Would you also mind just touching a little bit more on the transit center?
Yeah.
With traffic?
Happy to do so. Oh, yeah, thank you. That's right. So if we have a transit facility, actually, let's stick with this map here.
Explain the location for that before the four-way stop and the reasoning for that, please.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So here's where the four-way stop is, which would eventually turn into a roundabout, a smaller roundabout, but one that can get truck traffic through. As you're coming into the community, before you get here, where the cars would go that way, or if they want to go back that way, there would be a transit hub, essentially. That's where you would come, you would park your car, and you would jump on the shuttle or jump on the bus. I mean, here in Ogden, they've got the those little shuttle buses that drive around downtown area. You could have something as interesting as that, commuting people through the area. But they would leave their car and not need to jam up the roads quite as much, to the extent that they can. So we just got done talking about short-term rentals. Folks who come to the area with a short-term rental. I mean, we just with the help of the folks from Wolf Creek, we just built that pathway all the way down Wolf Creek Drive, in part because we had people who just weren't familiar with the area trying to ride their bikes and walk down there to get to the grocery store. If they could drive their car down, park it at a parking facility and walk, or jump on the tram or the train or the shuttle, whatever it may be, or any of the pathways, their vehicle isn't going to be gumming up the right of way. So that'll help keep the rights of way a little bit more free as well. Coming back over to here, let me just kind of put a capstone on the illustration here. And this usually bogs things down just a little bit, but so kind of in the way that Steve showed, we add cars, which is unavoidable. Maybe. Okay. We add people. Hopefully, if you have cars, you're going to have people. I mean, the focus is on people, more on people, less on cars. Okay. Your sidewalks are going to look really wide and really barren until you get some street furniture. Which, if you look at, if you think back to any cool Main Street Village area, you've got park benches, you've got garbage cans, you've got flower pots, a whole host of things. So maybe some street furniture with your benches. You get some night sky street lights, downward directed street lights. Maybe. And then you get the fundamental essential for a Main Street area is your shade trees. Somewhere that helps, it helps better, your shade trees will help better frame the pedestrian area. So people know this is their space to walk. This over here happens to be where cyclists go. These bulb outs you can gather in. But this would be your pedestrian area, your space to walk. Some of those trees didn't come in, but you get the idea here. The other thing that we're contemplating, and it doesn't mean it's going to get executed, we have talked to the roads crew and tried to figure out what their capabilities are with their existing plows. We thought about center medians in some of these crossing locations to try and help better calm the traffic and get the driver's attention to know that there's going to be a street crossing or an intersection coming up. The plow driver said, no way, there's no way to make that work. But instead of doing that, if we stamp, if we do a different surface treatment at the intersections, that will be number one indicator to the driver that there's something different here. Big wide crosswalks that are a different surface even yet than the street and the intersection is going to be another indicator to the driveway, or excuse me, to the driver. But then if you're focused on emphasizing the area for pedestrians throughout all seasons, including wintertime, it's going to be imperative that you bring the driveway up to the sidewalk, not the sidewalk down to the driveway. Okay, so as the plow drivers run through, they will run a little bit of snow up and over here, and it will take some snow removal to take care of that. We'll have to make sure we drain it correctly. But if you're driving your vehicle, you kind of have a 6-inch ramp that ramps up, and then you're at the same level as you cut across as the sidewalks are. Obviously, you need the bollards there so you don't get someone who doesn't understand what's happening driving through pedestrians. But there's nothing better to suggest that an area is made for pedestrians and cars happen to incidentally be there than taking this approach. Now, I'm kind of a diehard on this, but you know, it's not the end of the road if the community is not ready to embrace it. That's essentially the presentation. Now, there's a lot more to come, a lot more graphics and a lot more that we want to run through, but I just kind of wanted to get some of your thoughts, maybe some direction, or if you guys just want to say, keep going, we'll keep going and get something in front of you guys for formal contemplation.
Where do you tie your horse up?
It's in the back.
Charlie, did you move? Is that your house in back of you?
No, that's the barn. that's my murder shed. I'm just kidding. I forgot we're in a public meeting.
Yeah, Charlie, I'd just like to say you guys have been working on this a long time, and it's hard to see stuff in 3D like that and not think it's going to end up looking like that. And we know it's not. But I really do appreciate your approach, you know, looking way, way, way down the road and wanting things to end up looking at least cohesive, not necessarily exactly what you want to look like, but at least they go together. And I see Old Town Eden, you know, starting coincidentally to go one direction, which, but I also see the 4-way section going all sorts of different directions, you know, whether you have old looking buildings or new looking buildings or little sheds or fabrics or, and I would hate to see our valley, you know, just be a conglomeration of things 20 years from now. So I appreciate you guys putting some form-based, at least planning into this and giving people vehicles to move their density off of land so that it can stay open. And clustering in villages and at least taking a stab at what those are going to look like. So I do appreciate this. I'd like to see it keep going with it, but I realize it's a tough thing to do either way. So good job, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Here, great, really a good job.
Charlie, the key word is rural.
That's right. Does this feel rural to you?
Negative.
I like it.
So I wanted to focus a little bit on Commissioner Burton's concerns about rural and keeping the community rural. What we find in the general plan, and Commissioner Burton, maybe I can help refresh your memory. What we find in the general plan is the desire for these villages to occur. The intention is not for the villages to be rural. The intention is for the villages to accommodate as much growth as possible to keep the rest of the community rural. That's how the general plan is designed. And so when you look at this, you're not going to see rural, you're going to see urban. This is urban planning right here. Urban planning creates an urban growth boundary that then doesn't trickle out into a sprawl across the rest of the valley floor.
Okay.
Can we put all the STRs there?
Yes, sure. Yeah, this would be a great spot for short-term rentals. Absolutely. And hotels. We need hotels in these areas for these businesses to survive as well.
It wouldn't last with as many STRs as we have. It wouldn't work. I'm just being facetious.
Maybe we could do transferable STRs. TDR STR.
I like your thinking.
Okay, so Charlie, Commissioner Burton. So
Yes.
I guess I'm getting a new vision of the general plan. The general plan isn't a rural valley. It is a valley with many cities in it, which are these little nodes. Is that a better picture that I should have in my mind?
Yeah, I'd say even less than cities. These are just little villages.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the general plan identifies them as village nodes.
Okay, so I've got a couple of comments when you say, should I move forward with this? I still have a real problem with transportation. And I'll use Provo. The Center Street in Provo is 15 miles an hour. I will go out of my way not to park in one of those angle parking places because it'll take 10, 15 minutes to get back out because there is so much traffic there.
Yep.
This has got to be a major thoroughfare. I think I understood you to say we've got to help the businesses by all these people knowing their business is there. And so we have to force them to go down through this pinch point so they'll look out their windows and say, there's a business there, I should go visit it. Well, I don't think that makes practical sense to me yet. You got to convince me.
Okay.
Because we've got a valley with all these people that just come here for a 2 or 3 day vacation. This will be there forever if we have to show everybody that ever comes here that there's a business there. You say we've got to have a greater than 100-foot right of way because the buildings come right up next to the property line. Well, move the buildings back. When I see this streetscape you have on the screen here and understand what snow looks like in the valley, you really got to have a place to push that snow unless you're going to get front end loaders and take it all out of there. So having the buildings back away from the property line and let them put their tables out there for street side dining on their own property solves a lot of these problems. So I would hope you would take into account as you move forward, how do we get traffic around this pinch point? It needs to be around the pinch point. And how do we eliminate the pinch point? Now, if you want to have a place for people to walk around, they're not going to walk very far in the winter. They just aren't. I don't see people walking here from the blacksmith shop over to the grocery store. It's too far.
Today?
There has to be transportation for people to get to the grocery store, wherever it is. I think we create problems when we concentrate all the commercial in one place. Then everybody has to get in his car or bus or whatever to go to the commercial, which is all concentrated in one location. Spread it out. Let there be little stores over in Liberty. Let there be little stores over in Huntsville. So people don't have to travel to downtown Eden to buy a hamburger or buy groceries or whatever. So great ideas. You put a lot of time into it, but I think some of the basic points, especially the transportation, has to be addressed. It just doesn't make sense. We run people through. I mean, if Provo had a 10 miles an hour, it would still be a problem.
Yeah.
You've got to figure a way to get transportation people who want to get from A to B around pinch points. They don't want to be in pinch points. They're just they're going to hate pinch points because they want to get from A to B, not E.
Chair, may I make a comment?
Sure.
You know, I don't, where it's only 2 blocks, basically, the quote unquote pinch point, I don't see it much different than Washington Boulevard where it's major highway, but yet the cars still have to slow down except for many blocks to 15, 20 stop and go traffic. And I think it's a lovely area, and especially with all the, what they've done to enhance Washington, downtown Ogden on Washington Boulevard, there again with the center flower beds, the nice walkways to, because of the crossings where they had so many problems with those before. But I just love it now, so much better than it ever was. But I don't mind going down Washington Boulevard, albeit it's 2 lane plus turning lanes, but this is only really 1 block, not even 2 blocks. So I don't see that as a, plus it slows down the traffic where you have the park there and kids, and I don't know. I think I don't think it would be a problem because it's so short.
Right. I appreciate that perspective. I look at Washington now. I highly doubt, Washington being Highway 89, I highly doubt that we'll ever see these roads unless a big city does pop up outside of any of our planning abilities, needing to have that amount of road right-of-way space. But on Washington, you've got those mid-block crossings, and as soon as someone's ready to cross the road, they hit the button, those yellow lights flash, and people slow down. And it's not a huge inconvenience. I agree. It is definitely, it does take a few more seconds to get through. But we are talking about a matter of seconds, especially if we're just looking at stop signs and no stop lights. We're talking about a matter of seconds of getting through it. I would definitely echo that. When it comes to creating a commercial draw, and Commissioner Burton, I'll definitely get you some scholarly articles regarding ensuring that you're routing your traffic through your emerging and downtown areas so that you do get those window shoppers, because there is some scientific evidence that goes into that. It does at some point create such a traffic problem like Provo that you need to find a way around it. There's no doubt about that, and we should try and plan for that. That'll be very long term. I mean, I think that we're going to have to try and convince business owners to suffer through the shoulder seasons for the first 10 years until this becomes something that just automatically becomes that draw. But it will evolve if it's got the right business owners, if it's got the right streetscape, if it's got the right planning. It will evolve to be something where there are multiple types of uses within a smaller area. So instead of needing to jump in the car and go to the general store and then go back in the car and go down over to the Newtown needing to go to the grocery store, there might be a corner convenience store to get you some of those services in this area, so you don't have to drive so far and you don't have to put so much traffic on the roadway. I would never advocate for this road to be 15 miles an hour, 25 or 30. And even if you post it at 25 or 30, people will drive less than that because you'll have people backing out. They'll see the reverse lights and they'll go a little slower. They'll see someone in the pedestrian right of way and they'll go a little bit slower. But nonetheless, the traffic will keep moving. And so you'll see an interruption of level of service of that street of a matter of seconds. I like the idea of having the buildings pushed back just a little bit further and having the potential for street dining or other pedestrian activities beyond the private land, Commissioner Burton, that you mentioned. And that's kind of there's a little bit of a balancing act or a trade-off there. Push the buildings back, keep it 100-foot wide right of way, and allow those business owners to put dining out in their setback. Maybe it's 10-foot setback or 20-foot. Allow those business owners to provide a little bit more of a pedestrian area. We could do that, or we could just say that's part of the public right of way. I think it's 5 in one hand, or I don't know how that phrase goes. I think it's 6s either way, to say either the right of way needs to be 110 feet, or you need to push your buildings back and have some pedestrian and dining accommodations there. So we can go either direction on that. I was just talking to Steve about this. It just depends on how much the government wants to be perceived as being a taker, right? We want 10 more feet of your property. We want 20 more feet of your property. Or we could say, all right, we don't need any more feet of your property, but your building has to be at least 10 to 20 feet back. And you need to put a sidewalk and dining or whatever commercial activity can happen out there on your property. We've already got through our subdivision code the requirement to put a 10-foot utility easement. And so if you're going to have a 10-foot setback, you can have your public utility easement right there in vaults or in conduit that runs under the sidewalk. So that would work out really well, whether it's part of the right of way or part of an easement or other pedestrian space on private property. Snow storage. So when it comes to people wanting to walk and wanting to not walk, snow storage is critical. I think we've all been in Park City, and I hate to bring up Park City because this is intended to be more park, less city in this plan. You've got snow all over the place. And in some cases, when it snows really hard, they do have to truck it out. But on reasonable snow years, they've got the ability to push snow up into these areas. And so we would limit some of that parking. At some point, you'd get the plow to push snow, and it would probably stand in a big pile right up over in this area, while this area stays open for parking. In the beginning, you're going to have the plow just push the snow because they're going to be worried about getting the kids to school and people to work on time. But after the snowstorm subsides a little bit, they'll come back in and they'll push that snow a little bit further back and into some snow storage areas, which we definitely want to provide for. The other thing is when you got that much snow, you're probably not riding a bike. So you got a ton of snow storage over in here, as long as we design the drainage facilities to accommodate for that.
Hey, Charlie.
Yeah.
I'd like to try to wrap this up at 8 o'clock if possible. Are you?
Yeah, I think we're.
Your presentation on this, or is there more?
No. Just part of the conversation. I want to be responsive and respectful. So, whatever you guys want from this point.
Okay. Does anybody else have any last-minute comments on this? Okay. Well, thank you, Charlie. I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you, guys. I'll get this out there. I'll get this out there online as soon as I can.
Working on it. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and move to public comment for any items that are not on the agenda. Is there anybody left in the audience who has a comment for tonight? Let us know if there is anybody, Marta.
Where did you?
I don't see anyone.
Okay. Okay. Right. How about planning commissioners? Any other last remarks? Director Grover, any last remarks?
Just a few. I noticed on the chat feature after we got through the short-term rentals that there was some people that were a bit upset that their comments weren't heard. And Cortland replied back on those that we did have a public hearing in the previous meeting, and I believe that you as the Planning Commission mentioned that as well, and so I'm not sure they heard that, but the public hearing was held in the previous meeting, and we have several last 3 months dealing with this, and just for those who are online, there will be another public hearing scheduled when we go to the county commission. So there will be additional comments that you'll be able to make at that time. This was just a recommendation by the planning commission. And also too, we will get this Old Town Eden plan and New Town Eden plan out there. And we're going to have several more work sessions on this. So you'll be able to give comments from the public as we go through this process. And please email your comments into the planning department as well. And we're welcome to, or you're welcome to set up meetings with the planning division. And we could talk through some of these things and then bring that information to the planning commission. So that's all I have, Commissioner. Here.
Anything from legal, Cortland?
Nope, thank you.
Okay. I guess lastly, I would just say that this is a volunteer organization, and I really appreciate the commissioners and their time they put into this. And I find it very valuable, and I want to protect it and not abuse it. And every minute that we spend on here is a minute you don't get to spend with your families and valuable time. So thank you for your volunteering, and staff, thank you for all your hard work and thoughtful progress. And we'll just continue to do our best. So good job to everybody. All right, meeting adjourned.
Thank you. Bye,
Take
guys.
care. Bye-bye.